Sorry for the delay. This hearing is called to order. I recognize the presence of members. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 180, 162, 180, 163, 180, 164, and resolution number 180, 185. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolutions.
Bill number 180162, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2019 through 2024 inclusive. Bill number 180163, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2019 capital budget. Bill number 180164, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2019. Resolution number 180185, resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2019 through 2023 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2018, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the City and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we continue the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2019, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2024. Today we will hear testimony from the administration on the capital budget and capital program. Mr. Stitt, the first person to testify is
Eleanor Sharp.
Ms. Sharp. Good morning.
Good morning, Council President Clark and members of the City Council. My name is Eleanor Sharp. I'm the Executive Director of the City Planning Commission. With me is Anna Adams, the City's Budget Director. We are here to present for your review and consideration the recommended fiscal year 2019 to 2024 capital program and fiscal year 2019 capital budget approved by the City Planning Commission on February 2018. I offer this morning a shortened version of our submitted written testimony for expediency. The recommended program is a 6-year plan for investing in the city's physical and technological infrastructure, neighborhood and community facilities, city-owned buildings, and specified vehicles. The recommended budget reflects the spending appropriations for the first year of the 6-year program. As both the program and budget are key instruments of planned physical development, the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter directs that their initial preparation and submission to the Mayor be a function of the City Planning Commission. The City Planning Commission and the Finance Department's Office of Budget and Program Evaluation begin to prepare these recommendations in early fall, working closely with the Department of Public Properties, Capital Projects Division, and 21 other departments. This collaborative process produces a program and a budget that advances the city's comprehensive plan, addresses capital needs, and aligns with our spending capacity and financial resources. The recommended capital program calls for over $1 billion of new city tax-supported general obligated bond funding to support public improvements throughout Philadelphia. City funds are strategically programmed to leverage additional resources provided by our valued regional, state, federal, and private partners. When all sources of expected new funding are included, including for aviation and water, the recommended capital program proposes more than $8.8 billion of additional improvements, including carry-forward appropriations from previous years. The overall fiscal year 2019 to 2024 recommended capital program totals $10.2 billion. For fiscal year 2019, the recommended capital budget calls for $171.7 million of new general obligation bond funding. This amount is an increase over the $165.2 million appropriated in the fiscal year 2018 budget, and it continues the city's overall effort this decade to boost capital investment. The capital budget would support new funding in 38 project lines across 19 departments that rely on city general obligation dollars for at least part of their capital spending. The projects included in the recommended program and budget complement the mayor's priorities to invest in the city's youth, in more efficient and effective public services, and in equitable economic progress. Our submitted testimony highlights several examples. While these investments are significant, we know that they do not include all the projects that departments have requested, nor everything envisioned in our department's master plans and facilities plans. The amount of new spending in this year's capital program and budget is limited, in part because city departments have prior year carry-forward funds that should be spent down on projects already in the pipeline before the city incurs new tax-supported debt. We must keep a close eye on Philadelphia's ratio of debt service to total expenses, being aware that there are complementary borrowings planned for the Rebuild Initiative, housing, and energy conservation. Increase in city borrowing means increase in debt service and fixed costs, reducing the city's budgetary flexibility. In addition, a high ratio could impact the city's bond rating, which would increase the cost of borrowing. The administration is nevertheless committed to investing in the city's infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. City agencies are working to implement projects that are already in the pipeline and to improve project identification, design, and construction for projects in the future. To leverage more funding and advance more projects, additional resources in the operating budget have been set aside to fund additional staff in the Streets Department, Parks and Recreation, and the Office of Innovation and Technology. This increase in capacity will result in the city's ability to apply for additional capital dollars from the federal and state government, as well as align investments in both capital and operating budgets. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Ann and I would be happy to address any questions that you may have. Please note that the leadership of city departments are present in addition to representatives from the Department of Finance, Office of Budget and Program Evaluation, and the Department of Public Property to assist in answering your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I had a couple of questions. So, first, thank you. Thank you for your service. As I'm reading on page 13 on the capital programs, currently there's approximately $444 million in tax-supported carry-forward funding in FY19 through 24 capital program. And additionally, there are approximately $622 million in state, federal, and private carry-forward funding in this year's proposed capital program. And in FY15, the proposed capital program, there was an additional $290 million in tax support and $438 in state, federal, and private carry forward. And this appears to be an increasing trend in terms of the growing level of carry forward. So I guess my question is, one, do we have a plan on spending all of this tax-supported funding? Because I can speak for myself and probably for my colleagues that we'd like to see a whole lot of capital projects move a lot quicker than they are. So can you talk to me about what the timeline is or what the strategy is on moving these programs? I recall in years past, actually I guess this was when Rendell was the mayor, there was a shift in terms of who was responsible for capital programs division. One time they actually created an office of capital programs to facilitate and expedite, and then it went back to the departments. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know where it is now. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. So the bottom line is, what are we going to do to spend this money?
Good morning, Council President. I'm Anna Adams. I'm the Budget Director. There are a few things that we're doing on the carry forward. I think just to kind of clarify, part of the carry forward numbers included there are also the FY18 appropriations, and as just by the nature of the timing, the money doesn't become available until January, and so because we had a large budget last year, the number is slightly distorted because no department will have been able to have spent that carry forward at all by the time that the budget document was put together. So just want to make sure that's clear. We are spending down a little faster than we have in previous years. We just ran the numbers actually earlier last week just to make sure that we were sort of seeing this. In FY16, we spent on average about $8.8 million a month. And so far this year, we're spending $13.8 million a month. So we're making some progress in spending down that prior year appropriation. It's not as fast as we would like, and we don't know whether that 13.8 will continue throughout the rest of the year, but we are making some progress, and you can see it in terms of different projects that are happening. We have, especially the Department of Public Property, have found ways to use the Redevelopment Authority to be able to kind of quickly spend down the funds that they've been given. There is some seasonality when we've added a lot of funds in street repaving. That will happen in the spring. It doesn't get spent in the kind of the winter months. It's not as fast as we would like, and there's a lot of appropriations in there for federal and state funding. We hope that materializes. There may be a point where we kind of go back and clean up some of that prior federal and state appropriations that didn't materialize, and then it gives a better, clearer picture of the money that's available to be spent. And so we'll go through that exercise over the next few months and make sure that we've kind of got a clean picture for you to see. We have tried in the budget this year and last year to not add appropriations for departments that have significant amount of carry forward in the thought that they should be spending that prior appropriations first. And so we try to just allocate money for the projects that we know the departments have the capacity to use, and also to kind of just finish off a project if they're waiting on appropriations to finalize a project. But we know that there are some challenges on spending that, and so we are trying to do better than we have done in the past.
So, very creative response. So, how much of this money is or could be related to libraries and rec centers and parks?
So the carry forward by department is in the, I can get that to you. So it's listed in each department, and so you can see the total by. Do you want me to list out the library carry forward? Okay, I can do that. Give me a second.
And I'm telling why I'm asking if there's a significant amount of carry forward dollars that are in those categories, then my question is, while we're awaiting a resolution on our litigation, i.e. sugar tax, why wouldn't we just accelerate spending? Because we're moving forward on planning and all the other aspects of rebuild, but at the end of the day, we're not spending money because there's uncertainty with that money.
Okay, so if you look in the book, page 70 shows the libraries carry forward, and they show that in the book it's 8.4 million, but apparently they've just encumbered 5 million of that, so there's only about 3 million remaining in the carry forward for the library. So part of this, just to also make sure, this is as of December. Money has been, departments have been spending money and encumbering money since the book was put together. When we drew the carry forward as a snapshot in time as of December. And so even though it shows 8.4 million in carry forward for the library, I think there's probably about 3 million remaining carry forward, and we anticipate that the library will use that on projects that they're going through for the rest of the year. And I can go through the other departments if that's helpful.
All right, so this one, because this one I want to ask you to do, if you can do this for us. Mm-hmm. With respect to the larger 622 and the 445, can you give us a timeline? Because, testifying in budget hearings is one thing, but the reality is if you have a timeline on what your strategy is in terms of accelerating the expenditures of those dollars, it will be helpful to us, so we'll have benchmarks and we'll know if the benchmarks were met
Yeah, and we
we're
can work with
happy.
your
If
team
not,
to make sure it's
we
displayed how
wanna-
you'd like it to be
Can
displayed.
you lay it out for us, please?
Yes, we will definitely get you that.
All right. I want to ask you a question about something in my good friend and Councilwoman Blackwell's district, but it had a citywide focus. 46 and Market. Spent a lot of money on that, 50 million, I believe. So what's the status of us recouping that money?
I'll actually ask Anne Fedulin and to come, and Commissioner Bridget Greenwell to come up and answer some questions about the timeline. I know that they have more expertise than I do on that.
My name is Ann Fedulin. I'm Director of Planning and Development for the City of Philadelphia. As was mentioned in the budget hearing yesterday about 4601, there has been an RFP put out for the shortlisted development list. The applications, responses back to that are due April 16th. We do expect that we will recoup some of the cost, but as we've stated all along, by the sale of that building, we do not expect to recoup all of the capital dollars that have been spent in that building.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you can go.
I was just going to say my name. Bridget Collins Greenwell, Department of Public Property Commissioner, and exactly what Ann said, we're waiting for the RFP for the shortlisted group of candidates to come in on the 16th. And as Ann also stated, we have been publicly stating that that $50 million will not be completely recouped.
Do we anticipate getting remotely close to it, or, I mean, ballpark? I mean, you both were involved in real estate in different capacities. Tell me what realistically you think.
I hate to throw a number out there, given that we are waiting to get numbers back in.
Throw 75 if that's going to affect the
Excuse
bid.
me?
I mean,
Throw 75.
That's right.
I'm just saying,
That's right.
if you think they're paying attention to what
We
you're
expect
saying.
$100 million in the bid.
All right.
I do think we will get more for the property than what the city originally purchased the property for, but we will not get it probably anywhere close to the $50 million.
All right. In the RFP, what did you, and I'm sorry I haven't had an opportunity, what did we ask for in the RFP?
We left
Is it
it,
just a straight sale, or
yeah,
is it?
it's a straight sale. We had ad nauseum calls and meetings with bond counsel to identify what was the best, easiest, cleanest method to dispose of the property, because when we did the initial RFQ, we were not prescriptive about the nature of the transaction, and we got a lot of different things, joint ventures, leasebacks, just all sorts of kind of things, but bond counsel made it very clear that the best, easiest thing to make sure there weren't going to be issues with the bond that had been issued at 4601 was direct sale, so that's what we are doing. In the RFP, we have been prescriptive that we are selling the properties.
And we did leave it open-ended for the use of the property.
Yes, the use
Yes,
is
and working with the
open-ended.
councilwoman's staff and the councilwoman.
That was my
Right.
next question.
Yes.
Are you working with the council person?
Yes.
Yes.
Clearly, is
Yes.
the case.
Yes,
my assumption.
and the responses we got were across the board. They were a variety of uses: office, health, education, residential, so they were a variety. Almost everybody put forward some kind of a mixed-use project.
All right. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah, we
sure.
plan, once we get the responses in on the 16th, to sit down and go through the next step of the process with you, yes.
All right. You're welcome. So, I want to ask a question. It may just all be in my mind, but in terms of projects under the council's ITEF dollars, it seems like those projects aren't moving as quickly as they used to. And some might say, well, we're waiting for rebuild. And I've actually heard rumors, and that's what they were, that, well, people want that to be a part of the rebuild. Because I just, for whatever reason, I'm not seeing the traditional recreation projects moving as expeditiously as they used to.
Gotcha.
Not that they were always, you know.
I get it.
fast.
I'd have to defer to the Parks and Rec Department because public property doesn't handle those projects anymore.
Right.
So I don't know if someone from Parks and Rec wants to come up.
Man,
Yeah.
and although I want to say that we work well with Aperna, I mean, we really like them.
Thank you.
How you
Aperna
doing?
Palantino, Deputy Commissioner, Parks and Recreation. Council President and other members of City Council, while there are some projects that are being coordinated with Rebuild to ensure that there's no duplication of effort or any projects that we may initiate that may then turn into larger projects and therefore the work become, not be damaged or later. We have initiated actually some other processes internally to expedite projects. As you know, we have a special projects team under the guidance of Frank Baby, who we use to turn around capital projects in a more expeditious manner than the typical public works bidding process. We've also reached out, similar to DPP, we're working with the Redevelopment Authority on projects. And while the capital process still does take some time, we are looking at ways to shorten durations of certain processes within that larger process.
All right, so we work well together. I'm actually not going to not continue this line of questioning, but I'm a little concerned. The timelines just don't seem like they used to be, and we're waiting for the broader picture, which we all are, rebuild. All right. One last question, I'm going to turn over to my colleagues. And is there anyone from the law department here?
I don't think so.
No. This question centers around capital expenditures on non-traditional, non-city-owned facilities. And there's always been an issue in the past about whether or not we could spend capital dollars on school buildings, as an example, or school property. And I thought we had it resolved, but, you know, it continues to be a problem. Most recently, the project 11 in Venango, there's an issue, this thing at Duckery School, you know, and actually our interpretation of the law, which we don't like to talk about publicly, we apparently have wide latitude on what we could spend capital dollars on, but we've always been told that it can only spend it on city-owned property, and that's not, in fact, the law. So there's nobody here from law
I don't see anybody from law, but we can get you.
before we leave today. Yeah, I just need to get clarity because, you know,
And I think,
It's
think
like, I don't
part of it
understand.
there's a legal restriction related to the bonds, but then there's also a policy question related to the assets, who owns the asset and who maintains the asset. And so I think that's why it's sort of a complicated issue, because there is a nature of the fact that who owns the asset at the end of the improvement and who is taking out the debt service and paying for that improvement. And so I think that's where it gets complicated.
Yeah, but do you know that we can spend money on privately owned property?
I think
do know that, right?
The portion that ends up having to not be tax exempt at that point, though, is my understanding. If it's privately owned property, then we cannot use tax exempt bonds for that, which then we'd have to pay a little bit more.
You can spend capital dollars on privately owned property as long as it has a public purpose.
And then the question then becomes who owns the asset at the end of that. And I think that's where we all kind of
I
get.
don't think there's any legal issues relating to that.
I think it because
I mean, that's why I asked for the law department.
Yes,
Neither one of us work for the law department.
Right.
So can you ask somebody to come over from the
We
law
can,
department?
yes.
So we can get clarity on that, please.
We can, yep.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councilman Jones.
Thank you. Good morning still. I want to continue on the line of Council President Clark in the time it takes, but I want to ask a couple of questions. Did we, if I heard him correctly, there's a carryover over the last 3 years, and what is that total amount if you add them all together by way of projects that are waiting in the pipeline?
So, as of the time that the book was published, or the time the book we calculated the carry forward, I'm sorry, I'm just going to get my page. It showed that we had $444 million worth of carry forward. So that was as of December. That includes the FY18 budget because none of that was available at the time that this was put together.
So 444 million exceeds the amount that we are talking about for the rebuild project. So that's almost double the capacity of potential work.
So
and wait a minute, hold. This is on my time, so I want to get it out. If in fact we look back at the stimulus package that was offered by President Obama for the city of Philadelphia on extra capital projects that were, quote, shovel ready, that was approximately $80 million. Is that correct?
the total amount of the stimulus money, it was a little bit more than that.
Or what was it in your mind?
I don't have the, because it was on different things that were operating and capital.
It was different things and capital. But the capital portion, if I recall, was
we can
approximately $60 million, which is way less than what the opportunity is if we just kicked into gear our capital projects. We would stimulate more local economy than all of the Obama money that came down from Washington. And I'm guessing between SEPTA, PHDC, PHA, it was somewhere in the neighborhood, I'll give it 100 million. It's still less than what we have. If you throw on top of that the pending crisis with the school district, meaning that there are approximately $4.2 billion worth of capital needs by way of schools and those kinds of infrastructure that they have, you're talking about a sizable amount of money. But what you're still talking about that runs through all of this is the same labor force that we have to pull from. So if we get it right on the recreation side, we can get it right on the capital side, and we can get it right. So we need a joint kind of working group that kind of puts together all of these pieces of potential capital development and says, where are we getting them from? How are they being trained? What is their pathway to the union, so that we don't have to repeat this craziness every time that we have an opportunity. So that is not a question, that is a statement that I want you guys to work on. Now I remember, I've been here long enough now. See, I've been here long enough that when we were talking about our capital programs before, I think it was Brian Abernathy now, our deputy, that talked about the 200, and also the procurement and public property department talked about 200 plus moving parts. And that's why it took so long. And if we could just eliminate, what progress have we made? Have we cut it down a little bit? And by way of the time? And who can answer that question for me?
Have we cut down the carry forward?
No, I think public property can talk a little bit about the steps in the process.
And if we had 3 Frank Fabies, maybe we could cut it down. Because God built the world in 7 days. Frank Faby built a playground in 8, so he ain't doing bad.
Hi, Bridget Collins Greenwald, Public Property Commissioner. I will echo the sentiment of Frank Faby because we work with Frank very well. So there have been some changes made since you saw that 200-step flow spreadsheet, whatever you want to call it, that we had a few years ago. We have electronic signatures now, which is DocuSign, so that actually saves on the paperwork for contracts being hand walked back and forth from different departments. In public property and in Parks and Rec, we've partnered with the PRA. We've gotten quite a few projects off the ground by that cooperative agreement. We've actually done different types of projects. We use kind of state co-op contracts. Roofing has been a big one. A roofing project used to take us I would guess 2 years at least. We get them done in a matter like a normal roofing project now, weeks to, a month, weather pending. We also have different requirements contracts that we use, so that has saved a lot of time. So while the process still exists for public works that is somewhat cumbersome, we've made improvements, quite a few improvements to that process.
Quantify that improvement. From what down to what on average?
I couldn't say like the number of steps that were eliminated, but do you know a number?
What about time?
Yeah.
So I can speak to on certain projects, and I think it applies to both departments. For example, the requirements contracts, it can take a project from a typical 18-month construction cycle to possibly an 8-month construction cycle.
So I'm gonna need that quantified and
Okay.
presented. And the reason I'm saying that is not to be, if we're talking about this much opportunity, we have to get quicker and better and more efficient and effective at it. And so if we don't hold ourselves to some time of measurement, we won't make improvements. There was I remember, I think Councilwoman Tasco sat in this very seat, didn't she? And she went on a tirade, I think it was for an hour, seemed like it anyway.
Sturgis Playground.
Yes, about the time it took.
I was in the gallery, I just remember.
About the time it took to deliver that one project, and she was relentless with it. And I listened. I was a freshman maybe, so I half listened. But what I recall is a Granahan Playground, which I think we started in 08, 09, and it took 9 years. And the reason I remember is there was a lady, Keyshawn Watson, who had a kid who was 10 years old. And all she wanted to do was get her child on a skate park, and because he was a fairly good skater. When we cut that ribbon, that young man attended that ribbon cutting. He was then 18 years old and didn't want anything to do with skating. I mean, and so we can do better. We have to do better. So, and two tracks, how long it takes and who we hire. Those two things should be running simultaneously, and we need a work group put together with you, public property, recreation, procurement department, and the school district, because this is the same labor pool. It's the same contracting pool in the standard metropolitan area. And so rather than us duplicate the work every time we have an opportunity, we need to synchronize the work so we can get efficiency.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
I would like to add really quickly, there is a working group that has already been established under the CAO, so it includes all those groups that you said. I'm not quite sure about the school district yet because that's fairly new to the city, taking local control, but it is procurement and all budget and public property and whatnot.
Yes, please, Councilman Jones.
So this is the opening salvo. When we come back on budget, I need a report from that working group with the measurements of how much time we're cutting down, how we're working on sharing information about contractors and about workforce and about skilled labor so that we can create that single point of contact. Councilwoman Parker, and I thank you for being a laser beam on this subject, but I'm going to help you out with kind of holding folk in an organized way so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. All right? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Mr. Stitt will verify that I'm the next one in line, so I get the next question. Okay, I'll be brief, but timing seems to be the theme today. In the written testimony, you talk about the plans to consolidate the police headquarters and various police and fire-related issues. We know that we've heard for many years from the public and from police officers about the condition of some of the buildings. Is there a general ETA on the police headquarters, 400 North Broad? First of all, please.
Yes,
Commissioner.
the end of year 2020, we should have 400 North Broad completed, and that will include 2 new police districts
Right.
within those, so the police, the 6th and the 9th.
Right.
We have a 2020 timeline for PD 22.
Okay.
And we are also in the midst of a large renovation project with PD 2 and 15.
Okay, and long range, you're saying long range, is that the word?
They'll
you
all
used?
be in
Okay.
this, within the same time frame.
Same
Actually.
time.
A bunch will come online at one time. We also have the master facilities plan, which is finally complete and has fed the capital asks. It started this year, and then we'll feed them going forward. So we'll know exactly where we are and what timelines we'll be held to, and
And the
how much
fire
money.
stations around the same thought?
The
time?
fire stations are, yes, they're covered under the master facilities plan as well.
And on 400 North Broad, is the idea to bring everything in at the same time, or
We
you
will
don't-
probably phase it in, but we'll
Okay.
have to determine that as construction goes along. We're still in schematic
But
design and doing some
2020
interior
seems to
demo.
be the general.
End of 2020 seems to be
Okay.
the general.
All right, thank you. That's it from me. Councilman Dom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I have a couple of questions I just wanted to try to clarify so I can better understand, I think, our capital debt. The way, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but do we currently have 8.8 billion outstanding or approved for funding?
That was a combination of what we're borrowing and all the state, federal, private funding combined that can fund all our capital projects
And just
going
in
forward.
simple numbers, how much of the 8.8 billion have we actually borrowed and how much of that have we not borrowed?
You know.
Hi, Councilman. So we borrow on a cash basis. So as the spend down happens, we borrow. So we just did a borrowing for, like last year we did a borrowing that covered sort of 2 years of prior appropriations. And then we'll do another borrowing after that money has been spent down. So we borrow kind of, on the GO side, we borrow typically on a 2-year cycle as the spending happens. We are seeing that spending is happening a little quicker. So we build in the debt service, assuming we borrow at the beginning of the fiscal year, but we only borrow on a cash
I'm looking
basis.
for the number of money that we owe of the 8.8 billion that we've actually borrowed.
We can get that to you. We can get that to you.
We don't know that now?
It's a little bit more complicated because that's all sources. We have to do the airport and the water department and the general fund, and then obviously we don't borrow for any of the federal and state appropriations, so we can get that to you.
So basically, we have authority to borrow up to 8.8 billion. We may have borrowed 7 or 8 now.
So we have authority to borrow on the general, and we don't have to borrow on the federal and state appropriations. We just have to borrow on our general obligations and the water obligations and the aviation, just our debt, and that is including everything. So that 8.8 billion includes everything that's not just the city-issued debt.
But so it's city and aviation, it's together, it's everything. My question is, of that amount, how much have we actually borrowed, and what are we paying in interest for that money?
So that's just the appropriations rather than the amount of debt. So that's what I want to kind of,
Right.
we'll get you that, so you can
Right.
see kind of debt versus appropriations.
And we only pay the interest when we take down the debt?
Yes.
We don't pay it if it's appropriated, we pay it when
We
we
don't pay
borrow.
on appropriations, we just borrow on a cash basis. So as we draw down as we spend and we lose, we then borrow. We don't borrow until we need it.
So to understand the testimony of Eleanor Sharp, I want to make sure, you say in fiscal year 2019 to 24, you're recommending this program increases from 8.8 billion to 10.2 billion?
That included the carry forward appropriations. So that's just how much money we have envisioned if we put everything in a bucket for appropriations and carry forward what has not been spent previously.
And so I'd like to know, though, I mean, is there a way that if we're not spending this money,
Right.
I'd like to know how much we've actually borrowed. Is there a way to cut back on that?
So we don't borrow until we have, so even though there's appropriations, it's not actually causing any interest challenges because we don't borrow until we lose the cash. So it's not actually connected to the appropriation so much. It's related to our timeline of our spend. So when we work with the Treasurer's Office to anticipate what our borrowing needs, we look at what we are intending to include in the budget, but also the timeline of when we spend money, and that drives how big that borrowing needs to be. Less so the timeline less the amount of carry forward. It's related to the timeline of when we think that cash will be spent down, and that's what we base the borrowing on. So we try to be very careful about obviously we don't want to borrow too much because we don't want to pay interest, and so we try and be very careful about when do we think we're going to finish spending all that money, and then we only borrow at that point to minimize the amount of
So
debt
in
service.
simple terms, it sounds like if I was saying to a child, you have an allowance of $100 a week, okay, which is an insane amount of money, and you're spending right now $80 a week, and the child comes to me and says, but I'd like you to increase my allowance to $150 a week. To a degree, that's what it sounds like.
And that's where the tricky part of appropriations versus the cash, because some of this, so all of the carry forward isn't for the FY18 budget wasn't available for departments to actually spend until January. And so of that $444 million that we're talking about, we had, $170 million budget last year? So $170 million of that wasn't even available for departments to spend. So we didn't have, that wasn't kind of a cash that they were just sitting on. None of this is cash, this is just appropriations of timeline of
I know it's
projects.
approved. You want us to approve the amount of money, and I'm of the opinion that when you approve money to give people the ability to spend it, they'll find a way to spend it. And if we're trying to tighten our belt a bit and not have these increases, maybe this is an area we should look at and cut back a little.
And I understand so that's partly why when we put the budget together, and you can see there are certain departments that we didn't give them any additional appropriations in FY19 because they had carry forward, and we knew that the department didn't have the capacity. Even if we gave them additional appropriations, they wouldn't even have the capacity to spend that. So,
But in your testimony, you're increasing this amount, $1.4 billion, over the 19 to 24 period.
and there are some large projects that we've included, such as the I-95, the cap over I-95. We have the Art Museum's core project. Those are large appropriations, and also the repavings of streets. These are large projects that, as they go, those monies will be spent really quickly. So, for example, the Art Museum has. So when the money becomes available in January, that appropriation gets immediately spent. The same thing will happen with Penn's Landing. That money will go. That appropriation goes out the door really quickly. It's different from the way that the other departments spend, and so you see the program reflects both, and so that makes.
But here's my other question: how much are we retiring in debt per year?
I think I'd have to ask the treasurer to be able to answer that question.
Because if we, make believe, and it really it's not make believe. This is our money, okay?
Yeah.
And if we're looking at it in that context,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm of the opinion I like to pay down my debt,
Yes.
okay? And I just see this keeps ballooning and ballooning.
And what we do also is, we go back and look at the prior year appropriations, and we work with departments to clean that up. So kind of to your same point, that if there is, so sometimes there could be, a very small amount from a few years ago of carry forward that a department is sort of planning on using for a project. We go back and kind of talk to the department and just kind of get rid of that appropriations, cancel out that appropriation and say, we don't need that to be sitting there. So we go through that process pretty regularly with departments to kind of clean up that backlog.
So what I'd like to see, if possible, is a list of where the 1.4 is going. It's probably in the paperwork. I'd like to see how much of the 8.8 is actually spent and what the cost of that is, and what the amortization is of that, and how much each year we're retiring in debt, and do a chart of how our debt's increasing compared to how it's paying down.
Yes.
To see where our
We can
balances.
get you that.
Okay.
And it's probably worth, Councilman, us sort of talking you through that, because there's so much of it that sort of, but we can do that. We can get you something and then maybe set up a meeting and talk you through that.
Okay. I have some other questions. How am I doing on time? Okay.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Okay.
2-minute warning.
2-minute warning, that's right.
Yeah. I just want to make sure the treasurer's going to be here, so I may have some questions later for the treasurer.
Yeah, we can ask the treasurer to be here.
Let me talk about what the council president brought up, and I think Councilman Jones brought up too, is the 46th and Market. On page 2 of the testimony, it states that the plans for the consolidation of the police headquarters and other departments at 400 North Broad. Do we have an idea at this point what the capital expenses in this plan will be for that project?
I'll ask Ann, do you know? Bridget.
Ann Fadulin, Director of Planning and Development. So for the actual building itself, when it's a completed facility, the cost is $242,500. And then I believe there's a number that is for FF&E, which is
20.
20 million.
Does that include the purchase?
Excuse me?
That doesn't. Does
The
that include
FF&E
purchase?
was not in the purchase, no.
So is the 242 million?
Yeah,
And that is the renovation cost.
that's to purchase the complete facility, not FF&E.
So the total's 262.5, basically?
When you add in the FF&E, yes.
When you add in the FF&E, yes.
Okay?
I'll come back to this.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
very much, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Parker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to each of you. I want to start my line of questioning off with an issue that is of grave importance to all neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia, but particularly for those of us who represent districts where we are directly across the street from a county. So Councilman Jones knows what it feels like when the bleed leads to people to cross the street to the county. I, on Cheltenham Avenue, know what it feels like when people cross the street and make it down Eastern Road to get to the Keswick area. And so with that being said, relative to our commercial quarters, I want you to tell me, if you will, about our investment. And I want you to just bear with me for a second. We propose to cut the FY19 capital budget for commercial corridor improvements to $1.5 million. Now that's down from the typical $5 million a year. I think last year for FY18, the budget was actually zeroed out. But because Commerce had some prior year funds to spend, that we were able to keep a few projects going. Now, these funds are used for very crucial elements. I'm a firm believer in that Philadelphians often get frustrated when it comes to spending their taxpayer dollars because they want a tangible way to see those dollars at work in their neighborhoods. So when it comes to streetscape improvement, street furniture, brightening of LED lights, our SIP program, pedestrian safety, traffic calming, and the landscaping. So in my district, I want to just quickly note Fifth Street, North Fifth Street, is one of the largest commercial corridors in the city of Philadelphia. We had about $3 million worth of projects that were in the pipeline, and many of the other corridors also needed investments. Based on this information, I want you to tell me, if you will, your reasoning for cutting the capital budget for commercial corridor improvements to $1.5 million, down from the typical $5 million a year. And I will tell you why this is extremely important. And I want you to focus on that. I can walk across the street. For those neighborhoods that are sexy with growth and development, like Northern Liberties, Joshua, Councilwoman Blackwell, about the University City area, Councilman Johnson, they have booming development efforts taking place. But when you look at districts, middle neighborhoods, like the 9th, like the 4th, where we have the quality brick and stone old housing stock, and people are trying to make those investments and decisions about whether or not they should stay, get the bathroom redone because it was built in the 50s, redo the kitchen so that they can stay in this property. Commercial quarters and the quality of it are how they help inform their decision making. So tell me, how do we justify this decrease in funding for commercial quarters, but still maintain that we are investing in neighborhoods and not those where we're seeing much growth and development?
So we looked at the prior year funds that were available for neighborhood commercial corridors, and we looked at the timeline of when those projects would be needed to be spent, and that's where we came up with the $1.5 million for 19, based on what we thought the department had available for them in the prior year funding, based on the timelines of when they could spend that funding. And so that's how we came up with the 1.5 million. As you said, last year we didn't allocate anything based on the prior year funding that they had available, and we thought that 1.5 was reasonable based on what we understood of the future projects that they had lined up. If that isn't enough, we can definitely work with the department to try and figure out a way to supplement that. If during the year that there seems to be a gap, we can definitely work with the department to make sure that they have enough available.
I appreciate that response, because I just want to note for the record, I'm looking at the Commerce Department shortlist, their pipeline. And so for the next few years, it does contain projects in every council district. And it's about $33 million, and I don't know if we're going to get some state funds to come in and help fill some of those gaps. But that list doesn't include projects that didn't make it on to Commerce's immediate priority list. So with that being said, I want to note for the record that we can't say that we are making significant investments in neighborhoods across the city, and not those that are just, sexy and new and welcoming new Philadelphia residents, but we have to invest in those neighborhoods, like Mount Airy, West Oak Lane, Alany, Logan, Longcrest, Lawndale, Burholme, because these people are the heart of Philadelphia's tax base, and they've been there before the sexy new folks that we are welcoming coming to Philadelphia. They've been holding Philadelphia down for a very long time. And I do want to state for the record that the 9th Councilmatic District, and Councilman Dom, I know you know this and you can appreciate this, we have the 3rd fewest delinquent property taxpayers in the city of Philadelphia. So there's no one who can tell me that residents in the 9th District are not paying their fair share to benefit the entire city, but they're not seeing a return on the investment when it comes to their commercial quarters. And that's important for people to say they're alive and well. And I'm not just talking about the Mount Airy that's on the other side of Germantown Avenue, the west side of Mount Airy. We've got to do there and then make our way down to Rising Sun Avenue and 5th Street, because they deserve investment too. In addition to that, I want to note for the record that, I got to give some thanks to some people. I want to join you, Councilman Jones, relative to mentioning Fabi. He's a dynamo. But Arpana, Azora, Tiffany, and Francesco, I know we can be very methodical and, sort of nerve-wracking sometimes with the level of detail that we ask for, because when we go to meetings like the 9th District Budget Briefing and Town Hall meeting, the first one that I'm having tonight, our people don't want general. I need to be able to tell them what investments are being made in their community. And I have to say the same for Naz, Karen, Yvonne, and all of the team at Commerce, who I bug with the 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning text messages that I send when I'm checking my email. And I'll yield, Mr. Chair, and come around with my second line of questioning after we go through the cycle.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Bass, please.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I just had a couple of questions for you, and I wanted to start primarily talking about capital improvements. And I wanted to know if you could give me, just to make sure I'm clear on what the procedures are, the criteria for capital dollars for a cultural facility owned by the city.
Just in terms of, sorry, I just want to make sure I understand.
Right, is there a cost minimum? What determines capital improvement dollars being used for a cultural facility? So is there a cost minimum?
I think there's a minimum of $15,000 to be capital eligible.
Okay, and
we have to make sure,
what's
there are a variety of policy things that we include. We have to own the asset. It has to have a long,
the city has to own the asset?
Has to have a long, useful life, and it has to be at least $15,000.
Okay. And from the departmental level, who makes the final decision in terms of what's presented to the budget or in the budget as a capital budget request?
So departments make requests to us and the City Planning Commission. We meet with the departments, which make sure that we understand that, and then we go through a process of vetting the request.
Okay.
And then we make a decision after discussing it with the mayor. Obviously, the mayor makes the decision about what we include in the budget. And then after the budget has been put together and council approves the budget, then the departments work with us to make sure that they're spending the money on those appropriate projects.
If a department has not made a request, are they then excluded from the conversation, or is there any consideration for departments that haven't made requests?
If a department hasn't made a request, sometimes we get some notice that a department wants something through, and then we try and find out what that is, and we, maybe someone has called the mayor or called the mayor's office and said, have you thought about this issue? And we try and make sure we understand what that is and reach out to those departments, even if they haven't gone through the formal process.
Okay. So, okay. So can you give me an idea of the cultural facilities that are held by the city that would fall under the eligibility for capital improvements?
Okay.
Councilwoman, some of the facilities that are included in that list currently are the African American Museum, the Mann Center, the Mummers Museum, the Betsy Ross House. The Dell, the Robert Hood Dell.
Anything else?
We can get a list to you of recent
Okay.
capital improvements at
Okay,
facilities.
but does that cover most of the list, would you say, or are there some things that are outstanding?
So on an annual basis, working with budget and the Office of Arts and Culture, we put out an open call to the cultural facilities, and they are welcome to submit requests, and they are vetted along with the Office of Arts and Culture and the Budget Office. And anyone is free to make a request, and then that vetting process occurs.
Okay, but you'll send me a list
Yes.
of the facilities that you listed and anything that would be, that wasn't included on the list.
Certainly.
But overall, you would say that this is primarily the list of institutions that are held by the city?
Those are the ones that have come in recent years for multiple capital requests, yes.
Okay. So now, if we go to page 128, as I was reviewing, oh, and I don't have it at page 128, hold on. I noticed that improvements, and just in terms of being fair and equity, that improvements to the Mann Center for the Performing Arts were $1 million per year for 3 years.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I also noticed that there were improvements to various cultural facilities to the tune of $100,000 over a 5-year period, which doesn't start this year, but starts next year.
That's right.
Okay. So can you give me some idea as to what the various cultural facilities are that would be receiving that $100,000? I'm assuming that it would be split among multiple organizations. Who are they? And can we get an idea of how much they're receiving?
So, Councilwoman, that actually is a placeholder going forward for potential improvements based on recent requests. For example, most recently, we funded an emergency lighting replacement project at the African American Museum to the tune of $160,000. So based on the requests we've received in the last 3 or 4 years, we've just allocated an amount should needs arise. And that's why there's nothing this year, because based on the requests received, we had enough carry forward to cover those costs.
Okay. So we haven't made any commitments to anyone other than the Mann for improvements in terms of our cultural facilities?
Going forward, we've been able to cover all the requests made thus far using carry forward.
Okay.
Mhm.
But we haven't made any sort of strategic or planned improvements to the facilities. So as things come up, we can fix them, as you just mentioned. As the lighting issue came up, we were able to just fix that, we were able to address it. But we don't have any sort of plan in terms of renovation of this portion of this, building, museum, whatever. We just kind of, as things fall apart, we're just fixing it at that time.
No, actually what we've just starting last year, in fact, we sat down with all the cultural institutions, again with the Office of Arts and Culture, and asked them to present a 5-year plan of their proposed projects. So we met with the directors of each of those institutions and said, similar to the capital process, outline over a 5-year period what you anticipate your needs to be for physical improvements.
Okay. Okay. Just going back to the $1 million per year for 2019, 2020, and 2021 for the man. It states that the budget, that this budget would be, or that this commitment is a continued commitment. So can you give us some idea, what was the total commitment?
I believe it's a $5 million commitment, and this just continues that commitment for the next 3 years.
Okay. And so they've received $1 million per year for the last 2 years, last 2 budget cycles.
That's right.
Okay. And again, just, you know, listen, I love the man. I think they do great work. But in the interest of equity and fairness, I'm just surprised that there isn't that sort of forethought or planning to some of our other cultural institutions as well.
Yeah, this was a commitment that was
Yes,
made in...
okay. All right. No answer for that one, huh? Okay. Let me just jump right in then. So I have to say I'm very surprised that, you know, there's no commitment for another very well-known facility, which is Dell. So you listed about, let me see, African American Museum, the Man, the Mummers, the Betsy Ross House, and the Dell as our cultural facilities. And so I guess combined, they're supposed to share $100,000 per year for improvements. And yet we've made a $5 million commitment to the Man, which, as I understand, is for profit.
I think so. The way that the process works in the, so FY20, the 100,000 that we put in, so as we go through the budget process next year, we will vet, as to Aparna's point, we will vet all of the requests that come in from those other cultural facilities. The $100,000, just as Aparna said, is a placeholder until we've gone through that vetting process to understand their needs. It is likely to be adjusted when we put the budget together next year.
Well, let me just say this. So, you know, the Dell serves a different population than the Man. There it is. There's the elephant in the room. And so the idea that well, I go to the Man too, but I'm saying that Diana Ross, listen, I've seen many great shows at the Man, but overall, the population at the Man versus the Dell, it's different. But beyond the difference in terms of who attends and who's going to the Man and who's going to the Dell, is the fact that the Dell, you know, is falling down. And so the Dell needs, you know, I love the Dell. I go to the Man as well. But I know that the Dell, you know, has significant needs. And to suggest that they should share, along with everybody else, $100,000, which doesn't even start until next year?
So, Councilwoman...
Help me out, help me understand, please.
If I may, we're actually going through the process of investigating the stage and the roof. We know they have some severe needs with regards to that. And
But my thing is, not to cut you off, Aparna, but my thing is, if we know that they need a stage, if we know that they need a roof, you know, so when you go to the Man, you know, if it rains, you can still stay and see your show because you're covered. You know, you might get a little bit wet, but you can still stay and enjoy your show. If it rains at the Dell, listen, I've been out there in a poncho and gotten soaked seeing Patti LaBelle. I mean, it was just, you know, like there's no other option. And so...
Please, point of information.
Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Point of information.
Both of those fine institutions, both the Dell and the Man, happen to reside in the 4th Councilmatic District. And both are worthy of support. So therefore, and because of my colleagues' inquiry. I'm pledging $250,000
Thank you.
to the Dell if it will be matched by my colleague.
Well, let me just say this. No. Don't get it twisted. So I've already given over $250,000 to the Dell over the last few years. And as you said, it's in your district. And you represent it. So, but all jokes aside.
Anybody else want to put more money in?
Can
Let the
y'all?
bidding begin.
We'll take it.
So, but I've made significant contributions to the Dell. And like I said, it's not in my district. And so we have given over $50,000 a year, probably for the last 5 or 6 years, to support them, but it's not enough. And really it goes beyond just the Dell. When we look at the other cultural institutions and we see that there is one that is for profit, I'm hoping that you can help me understand how one that is for profit was prioritized over these other cultural institutions that are really scraping by. Not just the Dell, but if you look at the others that you listed, the African American Museum, the Mummers Museum, the Betsy Ross House, all of these institutions have financial challenges that, really could probably put a lot of these folks out of business, out of the business of being a cultural institution. So I'm really hoping that you all can explain, how is this so?
So I wasn't at the beginning of the conversations. This commitment was made in the prior administration, and the current administration has agreed to follow that commitment that was made to the Mann Center. And so that was the genesis of the $5 million commitment. It was made in the prior administration, but we have pledged to continue that promise. And so that's what's included in the plan.
Okay, that's not enough. I'm sorry. That's not enough, because it's a $5 million commitment versus a $500,000 commitment. And a $5 million commitment for one group versus a $500,000 commitment for multiple groups, I should say. And there's just no way to make this math work. And I give, I give in my district, I give outside of my district. Some of these organizations besides the Dell, I've given to the man. I've supported the man. But, I see that they don't need as much financial support as one may have thought in the past. The African American Museum could use significant support, I know. And we've supported them and the efforts in terms of upgrading some of the things that need to be done at the African American Museum. But it becomes a challenge when I, as a district member, am more than willing to make a commitment outside of my district to support these citywide institutions, but we don't see that same level of commitment from the administration, which represents the entire city.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thanks, Councilwoman. Thank you. Green. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to follow up on a line of question that Councilwoman Bass raised regarding the man. Now, as a point of information, the man is it a for-profit or non-profit organization?
I'm not sure.
It's nonprofit.
My understanding they're a non-profit. I'll ask the district council. They're a non-profit organization. Okay. Also, because I know my former boss, Councilman Marion Tasco, was on the board. I think she may still be on the board of the man. And if I remember correctly, one of the things that they were trying to do going forward was trying to follow the leadership that Councilman Curtis Jones did in reference to putting a significant amount of money into the Dell. What was the total amount of money that went into the Dell East over the past couple of years? No, I'm sorry. Well, I know Councilman Jones knows. I'm asking for capital program.
Could you say that? Councilman, could you repeat the question?
Just the amount of money that went into the Dell over the past number of years.
I don't know.
Over the past couple of years, or?
How much capital?
asking about capital, it's Catherine Ott-Level, Parks and
Yes.
Rec Commissioner. I don't have that, but we can find that out. We've done some capital improvements at the Dell. We've also done a lot of maintenance there through our skilled trades, have done a lot of work there. So I can get that information to you. I don't have that in front of me
But
today.
it was a significant amount of money, correct?
Yeah, we do provide the Dell with a significant amount of resources, both from a maintenance and upkeep perspective, as well as programmatic. We have full-time staff that work on the Dell. We provide seasonal support at the Dell, and the Dell, does break even now. I mean, it's an amazing venue that has attracted some incredible talent since we've been able to turn it around, I think, over the last 5, 6, 8 years. And so that it sells out. I'd say 80 to 90% of it shows. So there's, thankfully we have a revenue stream through those ticket sales that support it at a high level. We did make a very large capital investment. I don't have those figures in front of me. It was prior to my time. That helped significantly. And those, it's a beautiful facility, and those investments have been maintained. And then, as I said, we continue to provide a lot of maintenance and skilled trade support. We can always make additional capital investments, but it is a very well-maintained facility right now, and very heavily programmed.
Just one thing to add, Councilman. There have been hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment, and as the Commissioner mentioned, we can bring those figures to you. The current project that we're working on, where I know several of you have supported, is the stage and roof improvements, and what was anticipated originally to cost roughly $500,000, based on after demo review of the condition, will require significantly more, closer to possibly $1 million upon completion. So.
Okay. Also looking at page 128 and 129, I show carryover dollars for the cultural facilities improvements, which can be used for some of the locations that Councilman Bass talked about. Now, from my understanding, at one point, African American Museum presented a proposal for additional dollars, but then they're now looking at a master plan in reference to trying to acquire additional land or maybe moving to a new location. Have you had any recent meetings with the African American Museum at all regarding a master plan?
They have not reached out to us in this budget cycle for funding that project. In fact, some of this carry forward that's sitting here is actually due to go to them. The $168,000 out of that carry forward is going to the African American Museum.
But you do anticipate them coming back to you in reference to their master plan, which may be a significant amount of resources, correct?
We do meet with them every year. I don't know their intent.
Okay. All right, I'm going to follow up on some of the issues regarding diversity in this capital program. Looking at the fact on page 19, the capital program, we're about to spend $117 million in new money, about $1 billion in money over the 6-year program. But looking at the professionals we've used over the past couple years, I've seen that we've been somewhat diverse in reference to finance professionals as well as bond counsel, as disclosure counsel, but I've only seen one minority-owned investment banking firm being a book runner or co-senior. Is there any in the past, and for 16 or 17, are there any plans going forward to improve the number of minority investment firms who are book runners or co-senior on city-issued debt?
Councilman, the city treasurer and her deputy are on their way, and they'd be better able to answer those questions.
Okay. All right, I'll come back to them. And also, you in the budget testimony, Ms. Sharp, you talked about the concern regarding the ratio of debt service to total expenses, which is on page 3. How does that compare to past years as well as other cities? And also, a concern regarding the recent downgrade. If you can give us a perspective on how, I know that will cost us additional dollars going forward, but can you give us some perspective on the amount of money that may impact us, as well as what will be the impact on our ratio to debt service when we look at the other potential borrowings like rebuild, the housing initiative, and also energy conservation?
I know that the Treasurer's Office also would be mostly better able to answer that. We don't anticipate that the downgrade that we received on Friday will change our cost of borrowing, because I believe that it is now in line with the Moody's grade. So we don't anticipate any additional costs, but I'll have the Treasurer's Office answer those debt ratio questions better than I can.
Let me get into some of the department issues. So on page 87, Office of Information Technology, I think it will spend in FY19, $15.2 million in new money, about $49 million over the 6-year plan. You're talking about getting rid of, or finally getting rid of ACES and FAMOUS. Can you give me a timeline on that? I was using ACES and FAMOUS when I had more hair back in the law department. So can you give us some perspective on?
We'll ask somebody
what's
from
going on?
OIT to come up.
Yeah, we have representatives from OIT who are here who can answer questions related to the replacement of FAMOUS and the timeline.
Is somebody here from OIT?
They're coming.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Catherine Lamb, Deputy CIO for OIT.
It's the timeline of that famous.
Okay. So currently, the capital funding for FAMOUS will be available for spending in fiscal 20.
Okay, and what's the process in reference to vendor selection, implementation, considering some of the challenges that was just discussed yesterday regarding CAMA? Can you give us some perspective on how that rollout will go out?
Yeah, so for OIT, for the large projects which we consider our ERP portfolio, I'm sorry, this is the first time I've been on testimony. It's very odd hearing your voice. Anyways, we go through the RFP process for these large projects. However, in addition to that, we will bring in a vendor off of our planning contract to help us develop the requirements and specs. These projects are very large. There's a lot of a risk that comes with embarking upon them, so we try to mitigate the risk with having a qualified planning vendor to help us do our requirements and also help us through the RFP process.
So when are you issuing the RFP for the consultant, and you said FY20 in reference to doing the RFP for FAMOUS?
No, the capital will be available FY20.
Right.
We are starting on the RFP process now. So, you know, the process, it all depends on how long it takes us to do requirements. We are planning ADPICS, ACES, and FAMOUS all at the same time. That's a very big scope. So we are hopeful that sometime next calendar year, we will be able to.
And the RFP for consultant, will that be a one-year contract or a multi-year contract? Because I'm sure it's going to take a number of years to implement an IT system that's been around for whenever.
Yeah, well, it will be the schedule to implement will be multi-year, but it will be a one-year contract, how we normally do it with up to with some renewals that come on afterwards.
And the contract for the vendor to implement this new IT system, will that be multi-year?
Yes, well, not multi-year so it will be multi-year schedule to implement, not a multi-year contract.
Okay, but it's going to, as opposed to a one-year contract or multiple renewals, this is a system that's going to take a number of years to implement, and you would think that would be a multi-year contract.
Right now, we are not planning to do a formal multi-year contract. It will be our normal one-year contract with renewals.
The reason I'm saying is I'm sure that you probably not priced it because you haven't brought in a consultant yet for that type of contract, but that's going to be a pretty significant contract. And that type of contract you would think would need to come through council so we can have some type of oversight or conversation about that. The process of having a one-year contract and multiple renewals is a convenient way of not having it come through the legislative body. However, this is going to be a very significant contract, and you would think that this type of contract should come through City Council.
I think we can discuss that in the overall approach with the project.
My bell has rung, but I have additional questions, so I'll see you next round.
Fantastic. You coming back.
Thank you, Councilman. Real quick, SEPTA's here, right?
Yes.
SEPTA. All right. I'm just give some thought to this. I'm going to ask the question in terms of accelerating capital improvements. We pretty much outsource a lot of our work. I know we do have the special teams. So when you talk about the neighborhood commercial corridors, it's moving at a relative snail's pace in terms of the number of commercial corridors that are getting done. I understand we have money stacked up. When I see SEPTA redo actually streets and put down new rails, it appears to be, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong, that it's actually an internal workforce that does all of the capital improvements. And my question is, we're kind of pretty big organization. Is there a reason that the city of Philadelphia can't have an internal workforce to do like capital improvements such as curbs and sidewalks on commercial corridors? I mean, I got to think that that's no more difficult than putting train tracks in the street for the trolleys and redoing streets. And you didn't have to answer it right now, but you seem, just for some thought, because I'm you know, this whole notion of capital just takes so long.
Hi, this is Mike Carroll, the Deputy Managing Director for Office of Transportation Infrastructure Systems. We do have internal workforce within the Streets Department. I won't speak for other departments, but we do take on some projects, but they have to fit certain criteria for us to actually be helpful. And
where do we do that? Where do we do curbs and sidewalks?
So most of the work that
I'm being very narrowly tailored.
Okay, I'll have to get you locations where we've done that recently. A lot of the work that we're doing that's along those lines is kind of emergency work, make safe work that we need to do where there's been an event. We have to come in after the fact and make sure.
I'm not talking about that, Mike. I'm talking about the neighborhood commercial corridors. We have a lot of money stacked up in the budget that's carried over because we're not moving these projects quickly enough. And what I'm saying is, can we come in and do curbs and sidewalks on a commercial corridor?
So we're not set up right now to take a project from start to finish. We take on pieces of projects where it's appropriate, but we're willing to have a conversation to see if we can build up that capacity.
That's why I was like saying you don't have to answer now.
Okay.
Because I didn't think you were ready to answer that question, but you came forward. So I'm just, I don't understand why we can't do some of this ourselves. We have a union workforce. We have a very capable workforce, and I don't know why, if SEPTA can do it, why we can't do it.
Well, the short answer to the question is we're all busy. We're all busy on stuff that's, important to folks all around the city, and to have a dedicated workforce is a different type of commitment.
Well, you hire more people.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
As opposed to outsourcing that work to somebody where you're going to pay somebody to do that work.
And I'm happy to say that we have added more people with the operating budget that the administration is putting forward. So we're building that capacity.
All right. So I'll get a more detailed response, or you want to?
Richard Montes, Deputy Commissioner, Streets Department. We are trying to build our workforce. However, we currently do not do that work.
Right. Okay. All right. I mean, I wasn't looking for a direct answer right now. I just wanted to put it out there. And maybe as you come to some conclusion as to whether or not this is prudent, you can talk with the folks at SEPTA and see what they do to put themselves in a position to internally do that type of infrastructure. Because I feel real good about our employees. I don't know why we can't do that as opposed to outsourcing that particular work. Okay? All right. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Council President, thank you very much. I have a question as it relates to a line of questioning from Councilman Dom regarding the $8 billion thereabout. It came up there. The real question I have, though, is as follows. You had mentioned in the response to him the cap on I-95, the top of I-95.
That's right.
One, where does that money appear in the document I have before me? And two, what are all the funding sources?
So that will show up. Let me get you the page. It shows up on page 29 of the capital book.
Okay.
And you can see it here. We have it's called Penn's Landing Improvements, line 12-1. And you can see here, that's the city portion of the commitment, the 85 million. The total is 5, then 15, 15, 25, 25. And then there is a federal and state
Yeah, that's
match.
what I'm interested in.
That doesn't show here, I don't believe, because I think that will, it doesn't come directly to the city, it's going directly to the organization, so we don't see that appropriation.
Well, which
here.
organization?
It goes to PennDOT.
Well, PennDOT is, okay.
PennDOT's managing the project.
Okay. Oh, they're managing, and just for the record then, when is the approximate start for that?
So I think they began the design of that project. Delaware River. DRWC is the sponsor, but they've started the project, right?
They're working closely with PennDOT.
They've started the project and they're working closely with PennDOT on the implementation. So the project will span multiple years, but they've begun the project now.
So they've started the work as far as design phase and that sort of thing, but
Yes.
not as far as any...
I don't think they've actually.
No
Mike
shovels
can
in the ground.
I don't believe so, but Mike can answer.
Well,
more.
maybe a little update.
Yeah, not currently. So the project's been broken into essentially two pieces, one of which is the continuation, ultimately the completion of the Delaware Riverfront Trail. And so that work is...
What, you mean the trail would actually be a part of that as well? I mean, the trail would go over?
Whether it goes over, under, in front of is being determined.
Can't go under, you got cars running around.
Well, you're going to have cars going under, so there's some space
Okay.
where some pedestrian bike activity could take place. It's not likely to go under, but I'm just telling you that hasn't been worked out completely.
And completion date is approximately,
I'm not comfortable telling you that. PennDOT, I think, is still trying to figure out how it fits in with their whole schedule for I-95, so we can get back to you with more information on that.
okay, and it's definitely a PennDOT project.
Yes, it
With
is.
significant, I guess, federal dollars as well.
So I can't comment on the mix, but there is federal money because of the I-95 project being an interstate system project.
And we couldn't, I mean, as a city, we couldn't possibly afford that on our own.
Not on our own, but our contribution is pretty significant locally.
And what is the contribution for the city?
It's 85 million.
85 million, okay. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Townsend.
Wow. Thank you, Council President. I have a couple questions I just want to have for the record. Some clarity around rebuild. And the recent report by our city controller, Rebecca Reinhardt, that talked about a significant portion of the 85 million that we collected from the sweetened beverage tax going into the general fund. And so just for the record, so we can do things in decency and transparency, I have an understanding, but at least for the record, can you just clarify the decision-making of why we spent 22 million of the 85 million on the community schools and pre-K rollout? What was behind the decision-making of actually spending the 22 million? And also, is there a plan B in the event that I have wishful and I'm optimistic that we'll win the court decision, but sometime the creek may rise and, the universe may have a different direction for us to go into. Is there going to be a plan B in the event that we don't move forward? And is the city going to repay the 22 million that we've already spent out of sweetened beverage tax in the event that we don't move forward? So,
So there's multiple points to your question. So as we are in litigation, so we have in FY17, we spent about 20 million. We are expecting to spend another about 29 million in FY18 on pre-K community schools and kind of the other costs that are related to, including the revenue collection costs and other costs that are related to that program. Until the litigation is resolved, we have said that we will not expand the number of pre-K slots further than the 2,000 that we've already committed, as well as the number of community schools, which we are at 12 currently. And we will also not issue any debt service on borrowing for rebuild. We anticipate that we will also win that litigation. We're confident in our case, and we believe that will be resolved at some point in FY19. At that point, we'll be able to initiate one of our first borrowings for rebuild, and we'll also eventually be able to expand the number of seats for pre-K and the number of community schools. The timing of that will depend on when we actually get the litigation resolved, but we are confident in our case. However, until the litigation is resolved, we didn't think it would be fiscally prudent to be expanding any further than we have, because there's a risk to that.
okay. And so, and just for the record, so the administration's position is we're not going to spend money on the bonding
That's right.
this early on in the process, because that would be irresponsible, correct?
That's correct.
And just clarify the decision-making that even roll out the various components that we have up to this point, as opposed to saying, you know what, until this litigation is resolved, we're not going to spend anything.
Yeah,
What's the reasoning behind rolling out in increments?
And it's a level of risk. As you know, Councilman, it's not that we have sort of excess funding that we can sort of. We really felt strongly that we wanted to make the investment in pre-K and community schools. We also feel very committed to rebuild, and so that's why we also have we have the capital money that we've also currently already allocated to rebuild. Part of this is that the mayor feels very strongly about the need for high-quality pre-K and these quality community schools. And so we really wanted to do this, even though we're taking a bit of a risk in the fact that we don't know what the results
Risk for the children, correct?
So at this point, the risk is that we won't be able to expand and we'll have to stop the programs if we lost the lawsuit. And there's also other kind of potential risks. We don't know how the judge would rule. And so we had to be very careful, hence the reason why we put money in reserve while the litigation was being resolved. We anticipate once that litigation is resolved, we'll actually be able to spend those funds that we had placed in reserve and be able to add sort of supports for classrooms providers and pre-K providers.
And this is very important. So for the record, the funding that's inside the reserves, other than that's what's spent on community schools and the rollout of universal pre-K, the remaining funding has not been spent and will not be spent on anything else other than the rebuild initiative.
Yeah, so what we have, as I mentioned before, there are some costs in the revenue department for the implementation and for the related sort of advertising about the tax. There was a healthy beverage tax credit in the business tax, and so that's also included in the cost, and also some fringe benefits. But other than that, yeah.
But just being clear, because the report kind of gave an impression to the wider public, and I hear this when I go out into my community, the report gave a wider impression that we passed the beverage tax and we aren't using the money to go toward what we said we would raise the beverage tax for, which is universal pre-K, community schools, and our parks and our recreational facilities. And so it's very important that the administration clarify for the record that any money that has come in to our general reserve fund is only being spent on the rebuild, universal pre-K, and community and schools initiatives, and that's it.
Yeah, and part of also just to make it very clear that as we knew that there was going to be a timeline that the programs would take time to fully ramp up. By the end of the plan, end of the FY23, we know that the costs of the programs fully exceed the amount of revenue that's being generated from the tax. And that was the plan when we proposed the tax, and the plan continues we knew there is a certain point that will take some time to ramp up for the programs. We would know that there needed to be some capacity building in pre-K providers, and so we couldn't suddenly go out with 5,000 seats immediately. And so as the programs fully ramp up and we expand the number of community schools, the number of pre-K slots, the costs of these programs far exceed the revenues, and so we will be a point, and then we continue with this is exactly the same message that we've said all along. And the dollars that coming from the beverage tax are used to support these programs.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that for the record, because obviously after the report came out, when we would attend a community meeting, people would be up in arms, and to be quite frank with you, kind of look at us members of council as being disingenuous. And so I wanted to clarify as a supporter of this initiative, because I think it's critically important for one, we get as many young people in a high quality pre-K programs, because they can be a paying grad like Mr. Johnson from Point Breeze. Two, making sure our community schools have a relationship with those social service organizations so we can treat and support our young people holistically. But most importantly, our recreation centers and our parks, it's even more relevant to me now as I think about as a kid, how I used to have to leave Point Breeze as a young man to enjoy myself in a park at 16th and Rittner or FDR Park, as opposed to staying at Chew Playground or Wharton Square Park endpoint breezing. So that's why I think this initiative is critically important, so our young people don't have to go from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, but enjoy themselves within their own zip code when it comes to our park and recreational facilities. But I just wanted to make sure, and we'll ask the controller the same question regarding her report, just to make sure we're all on the same page progressively, okay?
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Kiana Sanchez.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Anna, yesterday I talked a little bit about carryover funds, and as we looked at your capital budget binders, you report that there is $459.3 million in prior year.
That's right.
That is being carried over. Where is there a description of that? The only places where you carry over money and your capital money is through the free library, and you make a note of the city council money going back. By the way, there's money left here from 2004, but it's not on a department-to-department basis. So what does that list consist of, 459 million?
Each department's carry forward is listed in the book.
No, it's not.
If
If you look at the city, just to give you an example, if you look at the recreation department, 108, all these pages, it gives you the years,
Yes.
but it doesn't give it to you for streets, doesn't give it to you for aviation.
I can show you the pages, Councilwoman, if that's helpful, where it's listed. So if you want, shall I get to streets?
Yes, because I didn't see it.
Okay. If you go to, sorry, I'm just getting to the right page. So if you go on page 178 of the book, this shows the total in streets, and you can see the carry forward there. The CT is the code for carry forward, and it shows $69,760.
And but we don't have a description of what that is.
Yes, so if you look in the details, so for example, if you get back to, the page 176, you can see this is the traffic engineering section, and you can see there is...
Right, and then it says, see description on line 82, and then 82, it says...
Traffic control.
Equipment, but there's no projects based on
Oh,
it.
so you were looking for the individual projects?
Right, because what we were talking about yesterday
Sorry.
was the delay in how some of these projects get done. So when I'm looking at this, there's no way for me to track which
individual
are
projects.
the projects.
I'm
Is
sorry, I
there some
misunderstood.
way that we can get this information kind of on a district-by-district basis? I think going back to Council President's remarks about the delay in certain projects, is it a capacity issue? Is it our contracting issue of why we're so backed up on some of these?
Yes, Councilwoman, sorry, I misunderstood. I didn't realize you were talking about an individual project. Yes, we can get you a list of all the projects, and we can break it out in however format you would like to see it, and then we can meet with you and discuss it.
I think for transparency, I'm interested, again, in tracking on how much more do projects cost us when we actually get them done versus when we plan them because of this multi-year kind of delay.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
The other thing I noticed, which I know is not a subject of conversation because I don't know why it's here, is there's a reduction in the capital allocation to city council members. 7.9, we get $1 million every year.
There are two components of the ITEF.
I saw the commercial corridor.
No. There's the finance ITEF, and then there's Parks and Rec ITEF, and the combined is that same. We haven't reduced that.
Okay, so the 550,000 from the
Is
separated
finance.
commerce.
It shows up as a finance council ITEF.
The ITEF versus capital. I just wanted to be sure.
They're both capital, but one is Parks and Recreation, one is finance, which is a broader. You have sort of two pots. One is
Okay,
Parks and Rec projects, and one is finance, which you can use for other.
Just wanted to be sure because it looks like it's only 7.9 million in
Nope.
that. In the PIDC allocation, you put $3 million to replenish the industrial land bank.
Yes.
For acquisition. What happens when they sell those properties?
I think there may be a representative from PIDC here who can answer some of those questions.
Are they required to recycle like the land bank is?
I'm sorry?
Are they required to recycle that money back to our general fund? Like
So
the land
I
bank?
think someone from PIDC can answer any questions about that.
Hi, I'm Thomas Dalfo, Senior Vice President for Real Estate Services of PIDC.
Councilwoman, what we do when we sell property, we acquire with land bank funds, is recycle that back into the land bank to maintain, operate, improve, and then acquire new properties.
Okay. So do you acquire anything that's tax delinquent?
We typically do not. When we acquire property, if somebody is delinquent, we would acquire it and then look to address the issues as part of that.
So when you get forgiveness, do you get 100% forgiveness?
No, we don't forgive it. We would negotiate, we would look to negotiate to have the proceeds from the sale be used to cover, the acquisition be used to cover the back taxes.
Okay, I just want to make the comparison between the land bank. The land bank has to write a check to the revenue department. We give you $3 million, you get to recycle it yourself.
We do.
Okay, thank you. That was my question as it relates to that. In terms of the Commerce Department allocated, you talk about previously appropriated funds, and then we're only appropriating for this year $1.5 million. I know it's not based on need. Is that a spend capacity issue? Because $1.5 million for commercial corridor, after we say it's a priority, seems very low.
It's based on what we believe is the capacity of spending now. That's based on the timing of when that money is spent. I mentioned this to Councilwoman Parker too. If there is a challenge and there is additional need, then we will work with the department to make sure that they have enough resources.
Do we know what is previously allocated by district that we could share?
I don't have that in front of me, but we can get that to you, Councilwoman.
Okay. In the Water Department, we talk about a $2.7 billion self-sustaining grant in terms of our funding. I know in one of our appropriations meetings, we talked about the fact that the Water Department was able to use capital money for operating.
I'm sorry, I misunderstand.
That the Water Department uses some of its capital money for operating and staff. That came up in our appropriations.
So what we're trying to do, and the Water Department the same way, is eventually stop paying payroll in the capital.
So I think that's what you're referring to. That? Yes.
Over the next few years, we're going to be transitioning those individuals who are currently paid out of the capital budget into the operating budget.
How much is that total?
I don't have that in front of me, but I can get back to you.
And do you know how long that's going to take to
It will take, I think the aim of this is over the next 3 or 4 years, all departments that previously had people funded in the capital budget will be transitioned over to the operating budget. By the end of the 5-year plan, we should have everybody who is currently paid out of the capital budget in the operating budget.
How many departments do that? I thought it was just water.
Pardon?
How many departments do that right now?
So we have Office of Innovation and Technology, Public Property. We previously had Parks and Recreation, and they're on the operating budget. And then there are some finance employees and just it's a handful of people in finance for large projects like the One Philly project.
Okay. As it relates to fleet, is there a way that we can get a delineation of which departments are getting what?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to get quickly through my questions, so I don't have to do another round. Again, in the infrastructure investments, particularly as we talk about, and you listed this around one of the challenges with borrowing, you talk about carryovers for basic systems and other places. Can we get a list of what's carryover in those departments that are important to us?
So which departments are you looking at in specifically?
You put in the operating budget, one of the reasons, like basic systems repair is what, you have a carryover amount. Are we going to be able to see that carryover?
For basic,
for basic systems. You
PHDC?
know, we borrow money, right.
So is that for the, sorry, I just want to make sure I understand, for the affordable
Anything
housing
that we
borrowing
have
we're
that's
doing?
carrying over, because we want to make sure there's a spend capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to monitor what is capacity
Yes.
versus spend.
Yeah, that's just not a part of the capital budget, so that's why I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
I know, and that's why it's hard for us to track it, right?
So you're talking about the funding that's being spent through that new borrowing for affordable housing? You wanted kind of details of how the timeline of that spend down? Okay, we can get that.
Yeah. And, okay, I'll wait for my next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Down.
Thank you, Council President. few quick questions, then I want to come back to 46th and Market. On the rebuild, I know we have a multi-year commitment of close to $50 million a year. I know the council has hired an owner's rep, I believe. Did the city also hire an owner's rep to oversee this work?
I'll actually have someone from Rebuild come and answer some of those questions.
Nicole is here.
Nicole Westerman, Executive Director of Rebuild. Hi, Councilman. Thank you for the question. We released an RFP for program management services for Rebuild. The RFP was released, I don't have the date, but we received responses. We received 16, and we're in the process of reviewing those responses now.
Okay, good. Thank you. That was my question. And on the waterfront, I'm going to go back to Councilman Taubenberger's question on the waterfront development, which I think is great, decking over 95, because at one time I lived down on the waterfront. It was like living on an island. Couldn't get anywhere. I had to go to the Comfort Inn to get a cup of coffee at the time. But here's my question, and maybe out of the a little crazy, but I'll bring it up anyway. Is there an opportunity that we're reclaiming all this real estate for us to use part of it for park, but part of it to lease and probably generate some revenue from either building new buildings, office buildings, commercial, retail, whatever, residential, to recoup some of our investment, since we're capturing all this new land on top of 95? Is that an opportunity? Have we looked at?
I'm not sure. We can definitely have those conversations. I'm not sure those conversations have had.
Okay.
Speaking to Mike Carroll to see if he has any knowledge of that.
Councilman, would you mind repeating the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. I'm looking at this from the city's perspective, that we're, I think, putting up 85 million, and the state and private dollars are about 160 or so million, roughly, in that range. And my question is, well, I'm 100% in favor of capping 95. My question is there any way for us to recoup some of those dollars by maybe having it half park and half, let's say, for profit, for lack of a better word,
Okay.
with the city benefits in either the sale or lease of that land on a long-term basis?
So the issue with any cap project is the more stuff you put on top of the cap, the more engineering needs to go into the cap itself, which raises the cost of the actual project. And the decision that was made for the I-95 cap was to, within reason, minimize kind of the thickness, the strength of the cap, and that allows us to accomplish a couple things, but it doesn't eliminate the possibility of value capture, because the original concept was that the value capture would take place on the periphery. So those properties that are adjacent to the new park, I believe there's some discussion about having some single-level facilities on top of the structure. They would be getting a premium, capturing a premium in terms of their value because of that proximity.
I mean, I'm not an appraiser, but it's probably an appraisal question for us to hire an appraiser to determine the cost of putting in the structure to support a higher building versus the potential revenue we could receive by making that investment. Because if we have that attitude, Comcast 1 and 2 never been built. They spent a fortune to go up. So we should at least look at that as an option, unless it's too late.
I won't say that it's too late, but that question is in PennDOT's hands right now. The design that they're proceeding with is assuming that that cap will have a minimal amount of structure on top. But it is a question that we can have documented in the process that they're going through.
If you and I were investing $85 million, we'd want to see if there's a way that we could take half the project and get some sort of return of that $85 million back to us in the long term.
Yeah.
So just I'll put it out there. Thank you. Let me go back to 46th and Market. There was a bond sale for 4601 Market Street. Are there any leftover proceeds from that bond sale when it first occurred?
I think the treasurer can come and help answer some of those questions if she's here.
Good morning. Good morning, Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer. Yes, there's remaining bond proceeds of approximately $11 million.
And when we talk about the remaining bond proceeds, if I recall, this project cost us $50 million. When you say there's remaining bond proceeds, is that 50 net of the 11? Would that mean we have only lost 39, or is it 50 including the 11? In other words, is that $11 million available for us?
Yes, it's $11 million of unspent of the original
50.
60, it was about
61.
61, yeah.
Okay, so the 61 minus the 11 gives us that loss of 50. Okay. When we purchased that building, did we do an appraisal for that?
That, I would know, I can find out, I'm not 100% sure.
I'd like to know if we did an appraisal for 4601 Market. And now when we're selling it, we are doing an appraisal, I assume. We're having it appraised?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
We are having it appraised now, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
And-
getting that in affirmative, yes.
When the decision was made, you may not know this answer, maybe someone else may need to come up. When the decision was made to not move the police headquarters to 4601 Market Street, when was that decision actually made?
Someone else will have to answer that. I will.
Okay.
We can investigate and get back to you, councilperson, but I believe it was at the change of administration.
So when would that have been, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can get back to you.
And do you know when the city became aware of the new opportunity to relocate the police department on North Broad Street?
No, we don't.
You know,
No.
can we get an answer to that?
We can find out.
And
Councilman, that was actually a conversation in the last administration also. So with some carryover on the new facility from the last administration, because I guess some of the same people continued into the new administration. So that was not new.
Okay.
But, and also, just as you wind down, second round, we've shifted to 5 minutes, so.
Okay, sorry.
Bell
No
ring if you
problem.
want to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker, and then I'd like to see we have the acting solicitor here, and the treasurer will probably need you for a question after Councilwoman Parker with respects to issues of terms of eligibility for capital expenditures on property other than City of Philadelphia properties, what the legal aspect of that was concluded. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to continue my line of questioning relative to like some bread and butter issues that I constantly get asked about during this time in neighborhoods. And with this in mind, I want to talk about the issue of resurfacing. So we'll probably need the streets department that is filling our potholes in the city. And I'll wait until the streets gets here. Thank you, Commission, good to see you. In last year's 5-year plan, your target for FY18 was 75 miles of resurfacing, and in looking at this year's 5-year plan, it looks like you are on target to hit that 75 miles for this fiscal year. So one, congrats for that, for being on target and hitting that mark. However, I mean, for the public and including us, it just seems like, you know, the winter does not want to go away. Right. And it's going to be brutal. So tell me whether or not you think all of the nor'easters and our weather emergencies are going to derail the city from reaching its FY18 target of 75 miles. And please answer not the question with not just main arteries in mind. It's like when I think of a snow removal, right? I'm very much concerned about tertiary streets. So talk to us about that.
Good morning, Councilwoman. Carlton Williams, Streets Commissioner for the City of Philadelphia. Good morning, good afternoon, Council members. Councilwoman Parker, thank you for, God bless you, Council President. Thank you for bringing up this very important issue. Just to give you kind of the magnitude of what we've been dealing with this year. Already we've repaired over 30,000 potholes in the City of Philadelphia. This exceeds all of last year's numbers in total. And so our streets were in dire need of repair. The administration recognized this and made an investment, not only to get us to 75 miles, but adding an additional paving crew will help exceed and get us to over 100 miles for next fiscal year.
So is that like the 131 miles?
Yeah, so the goal to get to that 131, which gets us back to a state of good repair, is to actually add a third paving crew. And we've worked with Budget Office to move some funds around so that we can begin the process of getting that third paving crew in. And these investments will start to minimize the defects that you're seeing in those neighborhoods, especially on tertiary streets. Deputy Managing Director Mike Carrolls will talk a little bit further about the 131-mile threshold and why that's an important goal for us to reach.
Right, and listen, thank you for your response, because so when we talk about 131 miles annually, the issue is how did 131 miles become the magic number? So we can give an answer to that.
Okay, I'll attempt to answer that. So we took the time a few years back to do some analysis of the backlog in unpaved streets. And what we were seeing was that streets were not being paved on a regular cycle. So when you pave a street, depending on how much traffic there is, you expect to come back in 7 years or 10 years, or maybe if it's a very quiet street, 15, maybe even 20 years. And we weren't hitting that. And so if you look at the number of streets that weren't being hit for the roughly 2,000 miles that the city of Philadelphia is responsible for, we saw that backlog growing and continue to grow year after year after year. And given the types of streets that we have and the cycle, how many years you should come back, we figured out that if we were able to reach 131 miles, we could keep that backlog from continuing to grow. We could stop that growth. And so that was the target that we set. I should be clear that that doesn't make everything all rosy. You know, when we hit that 131 miles, that's sort of the minimum state of good repair practice that we need to reach. But I am very encouraged by the investments which the Streets Department was able to make the case for, especially with this third paving crew coming in and the materials and the equipment that are necessary for them to do the work that they need to do. And so, you know, I don't want to make any promises, but we've been able to consistently get 50 miles done with one crew. So we figure if we have that same success when these other crews come in, they get trained up, they get the equipment that they need, that we may be able to exceed that 131s and really bring that backlog down.
I appreciate that response, and particularly for the benefit of the public. Again, not our main thoroughfares or roads that both the city and PennDOT, you know, work together and, you know, making sure that those are filled, you know, immediately. But the tertiary streets, and I know you, the Streets Department, I can say work extremely well with the 9th District, and I'm sure my other colleagues, particularly those who are district council members, but the list of those tertiary streets are extremely important, because I also want you, if you will, Mr. President, grant me the latitude, tell the listening public right now whose automobiles have been impacted by the potholes, because nothing that we did, but because of the nor'easter and our just repaving. What's the process for getting an issue addressed relative to your vehicle that's been impacted by that? And I don't know if that you can say it, or risk management or whomever.
So yeah, you can file a claim, of course. It's also important to make sure that you're reporting the potholes, because we need to know where they are to prevent these issues from coming out. So put them in the 311. There's some of them are responsibility of PennDOT. You know, some of them actually turn out to be not potholes. They could be related to plumbing activity. They could be related to other things that are going on. When we get the information, we'll sort that out. We will figure out who needs to respond to it, how it needs to be responded to, and we've done a lot of work to improve that. And so, you know, the public may have become discouraged because they felt like they go to 311 and nothing happens. Please report the pothole. Even if you think your neighbor did it, report it anyway. We can sort out the duplicates. So I really encourage people, take the best advantage. If they want to tweet about it, whatever, get it into 311, get it to us, and we'll get out there and we'll get that fixed.
Thank you.
I have a point of information, Mr. President.
Just want to close.
Councilman, let her close right quick. You want
Okay, so
this-
just quickly wanted to say one, thank you, and we're going to be looking forward to working with you to get those issues addressed. Wanted to say to you, Commissioner Williams, along with Perry, who's here, you know, we've been having a challenge in the 9th District in some of our commercial corridors relative to some specific issues, and while I won't talk about them on the record, I needed to say thank you to both you and Commissioner Perry for your hands-on approach, along with your team and your staff for working with us. So we're looking forward to coming up with a solution. And Mr. President, when I sent some kudos to Commerce earlier, I did not mention G. Hay, Dawn Somerville, and Dwayne Bum. We can't get it done without them, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Johnson, you had a point of information.
Yeah, just a point of information from the Office of Transportation, and we have the Streets Commissioner here, and you talk about the potholes throughout the city and bring in a new crew. I just want to, since I have both of you right here, how do you go about the equal distribution of manpower throughout the city of Philadelphia in terms of targeting those areas that most need the most help in terms of the potholes?
So we've got the city divided up into districts.
And who does the schedule of when those potholes actually get done based upon where in the city of Philadelphia?
So that happens at the supervisor level within the district. And so we were able to take requests if we know that a problem is special or more significant and kind of direct that activity, but for the most part, that's left to the routine operation of the districts. And the districts are set up, and they've been set up so that they match districts for sanitation, that they match districts for the water department, other city services. So the geography's kind of been in place for a while. And so if there's more need that's concentrated in a district, then we do need to come back and make a management decision to apply more resources within that district. And that's one of the things that we're working on now, is to figure out the best ways, the most efficient ways to take the information we're getting, make sure it's good information in the first place. And that's a key thing, and that's something that recently we've had some challenges on, but we feel like we're turning the corner on that. So you should see that we're able to be a little bit more flexible when we find that there's more issues located in specific areas of the city.
Just to add, Councilman, we also try to reach our service level agreement, which is in 48 to 72 hours of a complaint that comes in for a pothole. And not only do they do that pothole in itself, but they scan the geographic area from where the complaint came in. So we certainly want to continue to encourage people to call 311 or report it through our department so that we can get someone out there as quickly as possible. As stated earlier, we've already exceeded the number of potholes. We had a very busy winter season, especially with the freeze-thaw process, which caused even more deterioration of our roadways and defects. And so when those things come up, we need to know about them as quickly as possible so we can address them.
I'm going to defer my next question to the next round, and that deals with the repaving of streets throughout the city of Philadelphia and how we go about that process of figuring out what areas get repaved at what particular time, and what does that schedule look like, and the decision-making that go behind what neighborhoods get paved on an annual basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. No problem. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Bass.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Welcome.
I just have one thing really quickly, a request, Anna and Aparna, for if we could get 7 years data for all the cultural institutions that have received capital dollars and from all city sources.
Yes.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Good. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Follow up on some of the questions from earlier. The airport. Looking at page 18 through 21, we'll be spending a significant amount of dollars FY19 through the 6 years of the capital program on the airfield, terminal, outside the terminal, and other airport services. Can you give some perspective on the timeline for those initiatives?
The airport commission is coming.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Green. Shelley Cameron, CEO of the Division of Aviation. We can provide you a specific list of all of the projects that are encompassed under those major category areas, but just to give you a sense of the kind of work that we're doing, On the airfield, we are continuing with the runway extension project and extensive taxiway work. In the terminals, we have a few $100 million worth of rehab and repair projects, and that's everything from HVAC unit replacements, roof replacements, bathroom rehabs, really across the board. We're doing things in the terminal complex, and again, I can give you a specific list of those projects, but there are a lot of them.
Can you give some perspective on the diversity and inclusion that you anticipate? Just in my quick calculation, just for FY19, looks like we'll be spending about $423 million in those 4 areas of the airfield, the terminal, outside the terminal, and other airport services. And when you calculate through the full 6-year program, it's well over $2 billion.
Yes, and as I think we've talked about before, we have 3 DBE programs that we are responsible for at the airport. 2 are federal programs, and 1 is everything else that falls under the Office of Economic Opportunity with the city. We have to go through a regulated 3-year goal-setting process for the 2 federal programs. 1 encompasses any project that takes federal grant money. It's our regular DBE program, and the goal there, based on the regulated process that takes into account capacity and specific projects that are on the slate, the goal right now is 16.3%. And then for the ACDBE program, the Airport Concession DBE program, the goal is 16.45. We have far exceeded the goals in those 2 federal programs, but again, the goal-setting process is regulated under federal regulations. We have to do a capacity analysis, and then we take a look at the specific projects that are coming up, and that's how we calculate the goal. We are permitted to mark up our goal, which we do. We are always more aspirational than what the process shows, but those are the numbers. For everything else, which is really the great majority of the work that we do, our goal is 32%.
Okay. Based on those federal initiatives, you said the goal was set at 16%, but you surpassed that. So what was the percentage you surpassed?
So for DBE, and there were really only a couple of airfield projects that were eligible for federal grant money. We averaged somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 to $30 million of annual money from the federal government, the FAA, through the Department of Transportation for airfield work. We only had a couple of projects that were bid out, and in federal fiscal year 18, we achieved 18.1%. In our airport concession DBE program, we achieved a much higher percentage, 28.26%. And so far, in all of the other contracts that we have, we are achieving 31.7% against a 32% goal. We always try to get those numbers higher, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. My next question is referenced regarding the health department, regarding some of the capital spend. Anna, are you able to answer that question, or do you need
there
something
are
else?
representatives from health,
Okay.
so depending on what your question is.
As they're coming, so looking at page 72 of the capital program, looks like we'll be spending in FY19 about $500,000 to up to about $3 million for electronic health records. I guess my question is that a sufficient amount of dollars for electronic health records for our health system?
I believe so, but I can have someone from health
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
answer that
Right.
question in more detail. Dr. Farley is here.
I'm Tom Farley, Health Commissioner. I'm sorry, Councilmember, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, on page 72 of the capital program, it looks like we're spending about $500,000 in FY19 up to about $3 million over the 6-year capital program on electronic health records. Is that sufficient for our health centers?
Yes, we think so. That most of the implementation has been done. This is just to complete the implementation.
So most of the city health centers are already on electronic health records, and this is an add-on or upgrade?
All of the city health centers are now using electronic health records. This is building out the capacity of that system.
Okay. My bell is rung. I will see you in the next round.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona-Sanchez.
Thank you, Council President. I have a question as it relates, and if this question has been
ask because I was a little late earlier. In terms of the goal setting by department in the Capitol Office, can someone speak to what, if anything, we're doing different this year to assist the departments, particularly around Capitol? Maybe Christine, to meet the participation numbers.
Of participation, I think someone from OEO is here that they can help answer that question.
Oh, Iola, okay. We haven't had a procurement discussion in about a year around this, so I wanted to. And I'm going to assume that the departments, as they have done in the past, will report what their goal was, what they met, and they'll be able to provide a response to why they haven't met their goals.
That is correct. So in the the template that council provided, each department will provide details of their goals and their current spend, both in terms of SS&E and Public Works, as well as professional services contracts, and you'll see also their large contracts and their participation there. It's all in the template that each department will fill out.
Good afternoon, Iola Harper, OEO. So a couple of things I think that we're doing differently. The first is that we are meeting individually every year with every department, and those, especially the departments with large capital budgets, to talk about what their contracting activity is expected to be for the next fiscal year, what the scopes of those projects are going to be. We look at the history of their participation over the last 7 or 8 years, and then OEO recommends a goal, and the department will either accept that goal or counter propose a goal based on what they feel is realistic and achievable. So together, it's not just OEO kind of giving a goal, it's a collaborative process, so to speak, based on what's really achievable. That's the first thing.
In your experience this year, I mean, we've talked about what is the lowest qualifying bidder. Where we have, and this was a discussion we had last year with Commissioner Carroll, where we have particular contractors that have multiple contracts with different departments. Have we been able to capture that together to know that so-and-so company has 5 contracts, they're all behind schedule? Is anybody getting kind of reprimanded or taken off the list because they have multiple contracts and all of them are delayed?
Right, so we haven't looked at it from that perspective in terms of a vendor or a prime or sub working across contracts, but that's something that we can do. What we do, though, is look at participation on each project and make recommendations on corrective action plans or...
Has anybody been taken off the list for not meeting their goals?
Not taken off the list, no.
So what percentage of folks are meeting their numbers?
So you're talking about from an EOP perspective?
On the capital side.
Okay, so what I have with me is a summary of 2015 through 2018 of the capital projects and EOP achievement. And these are, it's a summary for aviation, L&I, public property, streets, and water. And so I don't know that I have we have the city goal. So for 2015, those departments collectively came in, and this is just for vendor participation, this is not workforce, came in at 25%. For 2016, they came in at 25.2. For 2017, 25.7. And for 2018, 24%. So an average of 20, from FY15 to FY18, it's at about a 25% achievement for capital projects.
When our goal is 30.
It was 30, it's 35 now. But
right, so what I guess as we prepare to talk department by department, departments need to come in and tell us what they're going to do differently on their procurement. And I'd like to see us really put together a list of contractors who think they continue to get contracts even though they have no intention of meeting their goals. And as Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown always says, predict their future behavior is past behavior, and we're not doing anything about it.
Got it. I will mention that we are working along with procurement. Procurement just added a vendor evaluation module into B2G, the system that we use. And that module is going to allow OEO to put in participation, so we will be able to pull up
in an efficient way what's happening by vendor. Right now, we would really have to look at contract by contract. Not that we can't do it, but certainly.
I think we need a profile of vendors, and I think
Sure.
people need to be flagged, and departments should be not allowed to hire anybody who doesn't continuously meet their numbers.
Okay.
Hello, Councilwoman, how are you? Christine Dornick-Lopez, Chief Administrative Officer. So just to recap, as part of the best value legislation, one of the things we committed to was holding vendors accountable for past performance. We've implemented, through the procurement department, the vendor performance module, which does evaluate DVE participation against the goals. We've just launched that.
So what are the consequences? One thing is knowing, and another thing is what are we doing about it?
So
we're evaluating what's the consequence?
So we just launched it with Public Works. We literally just started it in December.
Okay.
So it's going to be iterative, right? It's bringing all of the departments online, and it's about accountability. And so eventually, when we have that data populated, all of the departments are going to be able to see it. So, and it's scored. It's a scoring item on the best value opportunity. So there will be accountability associated with it. But we have to build it, and we just started it, so that's going to take time.
Okay, so in the interim for this year, because there's a lot, $176 million new dollars in addition to everything else, what are we going to do in the interim as folks begin to populate that around holding the departments kind of accountable, each one, right? So that, I'm just saying that when the departments come, they need to come prepared to talk about that.
Okay,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Real quick, I know we'd asked the city solicitor to come over, and I believe the treasurer should be a part of the brief conversation. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council President.
Afternoon.
Marcel Pratt, Acting City Solicitor.
Thank you. Yeah, real quick, we, in the earlier testimony, there was a question, and this has been going on forever, this whole issue about eligibility for capital expenditures, and over the years, it was you couldn't spend it on anything else other than city buildings, then you could, then you couldn't. Then we actually did some research and said it was actually wide latitude on what you can spend it for as long as for a public purpose. It actually, some language has suggested you can actually spend it on privately owned property, which I'm not suggesting we do. So I just need to get clarity, and a lot has to do with the fact that, particularly on the recreation side, where there's these instances where there's school district property, and we want to do a playground, as an example, Duckery School, just reference my district. We're trying to put play equipment at Duckery School, and we had to back and forth, whether or not we could and couldn't. So we ultimately had to figure out a way to funnel the money to another organization that was going to come in and do it. And I think that's kind of, frankly, I think that's ridiculous if it's a publicly owned facility, albeit school district versus city. Now the school district is coming into the inventory. Well, I guess to some degree it's local control, so I don't know how we characterize that. I just need to know what the policy as we move forward is going to be on eligibility for capital expenditures on property other than City of Philadelphia property.
I think your recollection of the issue is correct. So there is no general legal bar to spending capital funds on, for example, school district properties, except that you have to consider at least 4 factors. First, like you said, is this for a public purpose? I think the second is this a project or a facility that's going to be open to the public? And then I think the last is, or the third is, does it have a useful life to the city for that purpose? And then we'd also have to look at...
Is that 5 years?
5 years, exactly.
5 years.
And then we'd also have to look at what the restrictions are in the bond documents. But, it's a case-by-case analysis. So if you have a project in mind that you want us to look at, we're happy to look at it, and I'll make it a priority.
So, so can we determine that early on? Because the problem has been, and it's been,
right.
I know a lot of district council people, it's been frustrating that if you can make the determination early on that the eligibility is there, as opposed to what's happened to us when we get to the point, you get the community excited about the possibility, like I'll give you another part of my district up in the Lower Tioga, when everybody's ready for this park to be built in the middle of the neighborhood, and then we get there, and then they say, oh, you know what, we can't do it. One, the school district does not concur with your interpretation, because, well, this school district property, we're not going to give you the authority to go on the site and test. I mean, it's like all kinds of ridiculous issues. So if early on in the process, if we know we're going to do some activity, I would think that we would look at bond proceeds that would be eligible for that site, as opposed to at the end, we said, well, this particular bond proceeds is not eligible. Second, we need concurrence from the school district based on what you just said, and that would be helpful if you guys can make that, get some clarity on that, because we don't, like, you know, it's back and forth, it's just all over the place. So can that?
Yeah, no, that would involve, our analysis would involve, you know, gathering all of the facts. I mean, a lot of what goes into those factors are financial policy decisions. So yeah, we would definitely work with the school district or whomever to determine whether or not those factors are satisfied.
Is with them?
Yes.
So we can just do the 4 that you just outlined and ask them if they concur? Is that how we would do it?
Yeah.
Because the treasurer sometimes weighs in too, and as we move down the process. I'm just trying to first get us on the same page and then get them to concur so we can move these projects, which we have promised people in these neighborhoods for a long, long time.
Sure, Rashia Johnson, City Treasurer. Again, I'll let Marcel, I'm not an attorney, but we would also have to have, based upon bond documents, have both the school district as well as the city's bond council opine on this as far as to doing the tax diligence as well.
So if the bond documents are the city's bond proceeds, because rarely do you have the school district wanting to spend money on our stuff, so I don't think that's ever happened. So the question is centers as it relates to eligibility in terms of the bond proceeds. It's always our money.
That's correct.
And the question is, from the school district, is not the bond proceeds, any eligibility. The question is, do they concur with the fact that we can spend our money on their property? That would be, I guess that's more of a legal issue.
Yeah, and we can sort that out. But again, you know, it's a case-by-case analysis, so there are a lot of facts that go into it, you know, various bond issues. So, but we're happy to take a look at it, you know, as the projects come in.
Okay, so when you say case-by-case, and I'm sorry, I hate to keep belaboring the point, but you have no idea how frustrating this has been over a bunch of years, right? When you say case by case, can you determine that before? So you're suggesting that there are certain bond covenants for the different category or the different bonds that we have gotten proceeds from. So is there a way to determine if we're going to do something on school district property, we would use the proceeds for bond that have the eligibility to be spent, or the criteria to be spent on school district property, or how does that work?
I mean, I think we could, but we would just need all of the facts available to us. I keep saying case by case because, you know, the factors are going to be different for every project.
Why?
Right, because every project, for example, might not have the same level of public purpose or openness to the public. So those factors, you know, might look different for every single project.
I've never, and you know, I know. And I can't speak for other district council people. I've never known a district council person wanting to spend their ITEF money on something that's not a public purpose.
Yeah, no, that's legitimate. I wouldn't suggest otherwise, but you know, just for us to do our diligence, I think we just have to approach it on a project by project basis instead of just saying, you know, there's a general rule that applies to, you know, every type of project or school district project that might come up.
All right. Okay, so if you can get that sooner than later.
Yeah, we'll get the facts from your office on
the
specific project that you mentioned and get to working on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes. Okay, I'm trying to figure out who's next. I think Chairman recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Thank you, Council President. I do have a question for Streets Department, Streets Commissioner, if he's still available. Commissioner, thank you very much for coming back. I also want to thank you and your staff and all the line employees you have as far as helping keeping our streets cleared of snow. This comes from experience of having done it personally, even though it's not in the same magnitude at all. I was ground supervisor at Friends Hospital long ago, 100 years ago, and we were responsible for the roadways on the hospital grounds, and it's not easy work, and I think your group did well. Not only that, I was interviewed on Weather Nation, and some of my colleagues know I know a little bit about the weather, having a degree in agriculture, and like to talk about it. But I also, and I'm going to send you the clip, I also had the opportunity to sing the praises of the Streets Department, and I wanted you to let you know that did not go unnoticed. I was very proud of you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Our staff will certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I do have a question as it relates to the wheelchair accessible ramps. Is that program now finished? And is that the purview of the Streets Department?
Yes, it's the purview of the Streets Department. It's always ongoing. And so we designated actually capital funding in this year's budget to continue to address ADA ramps. Actually, we're planning on resurfacing and reconstructing about 600 this year.
600 ramps?
Yes.
And is that, some of that money for the ramps coming from federal dollars?
Yes, and I'll let Deputy Managing Director Mike Carroll kind of give you the breakdown and the split, but there's a match that we requested in our capital budget this year, with the remaining coming from federal and state resources, yes.
Okay. But don't go away yet.
No, I'm not going to.
Okay.
Yeah, so any project which involves reconstruction, repair of streets, which includes either state or federal money, will also include ramp repair along that corridor, that section of roadway. And so that's just the way that those funds are set up. So those are always incorporated kind of on a same time basis when the projects go through. And in addition to that, the Streets Department, as the Commissioner was referring to, has set up specific money which is dedicated to ramp repair, which has been very successful and helpful.
Our office has gotten a number of calls in regards to some ramps that are not working in this sense. There is puddling of water, which is never good because, puddling of water is not a good thing. But second, during the winter months, that freezes and becomes an exceptional hazard. Is there a way to talk to your offices about repairing that?
Absolutely. We can work with your office to look at the locations to see what we can do in terms of, it might be a drainage issue. We certainly work with the Water Department to see if that's an issue as well. So between us and Water Department, we certainly work with your office.
Yep. Commissioner, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dodd.
Thank you, Council President. I'd like to call up Rob DeBoe, Ann Fadulin, and Bridget Greenwald. That's fine. Or you can, but either one. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I want to go back to the purchase of 400 North Broad. When did the city become aware of this potential opportunity to relocate the police department there?
I don't remember the exact date, but I would say probably within the first 6 months of the Kenny administration.
Okay.
It was early on in the Kenny administration. There were a few different options of looking at to relocate the police headquarters from 8th and Race.
And did the city reach out to the developer or the seller, or did the seller reach out to the city?
I do not know the answer to that. Do you?
I'm not sure either. I am leaning towards that the city reached out to 2 or 3 different owners of different properties that we thought had potential for to put the police
And who in the city reached out on that in that process?
I think it was a combination of people.
There were. It was a combination of planning and development, public property, and I believe the mayor's office may have been involved, but I'm not 100% sure. There were different, there was a whole group involved.
Right, and PIDC was involved at a certain point as well.
And who conducted the negotiations on behalf of the city?
For the specific 400 North Broad?
Yes.
I did.
Okay.
With budget office, looked at some numbers in public property.
And I know there wasn't an appraisal done for 400 North Broad, correct? No appraisal?
Correct.
And what was the rationale or explanation for not seeking an appraisal for 400 North Broad?
Do you want There are a few different opinions of why we didn't get the appraisal. One is that it was a lease deal. One was that there was something to do with some of the tax credits, and one that the structuring of the bond. So there was a combination of reasoning.
But if you're doing the negotiations without an appraisal, how would the city enter into negotiations for a building where you really don't know the value?
Well, I think the city didn't negotiate to purchase the property as it is. There was a negotiation to purchase a complete facility, and so I think we based it on what we believed, working with Budget Office and Finance and Public Property, what we believed a complete facility would be valued.
Let me rephrase the question. If you were buying the building yourself for $40 million, would you get an appraisal?
Yes, but we didn't buy the building
Well, we're leasing it with the intent to buy the building.
as a completed project, which is what we negotiated.
Right, but even if you're going to lease it, in order to know the value of the lease, wouldn't we get an appraisal of the value of the lease?
I defer to public property on that.
We did not get the appraisal, but we did it based on the value of the construction, and the lease, I believe, covers, I couldn't be specific on this, covers the value of the debt, paying down the debt.
Was there any objection to us getting an appraisal?
I don't believe so. We've had this conversation before. We all
going
know
down
that
that
we were
road.
going down the path of getting an appraisal, and then there was a reason given for why we didn't do that, but none of us can recall exactly what the reason is.
So there was a reason given for not doing the appraisal, but we don't know what the reason is?
Correct. At least we can't recall. We've all been looking through everything we've had, and we don't have a specific to say this is exactly why it didn't happen.
And do you have any recollection of who suggested not to get the appraisal?
I don't.
Councilman, having a little history because it was in my district, this goes beyond this administration, and I think the managing director was involved really on it. If he can come up to the table and provide some level of I just know that the calls I got about this, both prior to this administration and during this administration, started with the managing director. Do you have any history on this?
Mike DeVerdinus, Managing Director. Council President, my recollection is early on in administration, the first couple of months, this became a question. I was in those early meetings. Relative to the Councilman Dom's questions, relative to the other technical pieces, I was not aware of that.
Mr. Duman, bring the mic a little closer.
Okay. So again, to repeat again that this was very early in the administration that this became a question. And was 400 North Market Street a viable building to move the police headquarters administration building there and other complementary functions? Was probably, I'd say, in the first couple of months.
It was a conversation before that
there may have been, but I was not privy to that.
You called me about this before.
I did?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the last administration, and it was you inquired to me about that when Mayor Nutter was still here.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't recall that. I'm not saying I didn't do it, but my earliest recollection was early in this administration, the Kenny administration. There was a series of meetings to discuss West Philadelphia site or the 400 North Broad site.
All right, so earlier testimony, it was said that the change of administrations caused the decision to be...
Actually, when the administration changed, there was some due diligence done on should the police headquarters go to 4601 Market. So we looked at several different options. One was to keep the existing location and build onto it. And this was a whole period that we went through with this, months and months of due diligence. So that was taken off the table after doing some investigations into that. There was another property in Center City that was looked at that wanted us to lease some property. It was determined that wouldn't be feasible. There was also a property that was down further along Broad Street that it was determined the location wasn't feasible. So actually, by process of elimination and those factors, it was determined that 400 North Broad was.
Okay. All right. Okay, and you have nothing else to add other than you were in the meeting early on in this administration? All right. And you had nothing to do with the conversations associated with the... I mean, you were the person that I interacted with more so than
I'm sorry, I do not recall that conversation.
And even in this administration?
Oh, in this administration, early on, I had some general involvement in the discussions, and can verify that this was an early item of importance in the administration, and understanding 4601 Market did that work, or did we have to consider another location?
Okay. All right.
All right.
I'll have to... All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry. Councilman, I'm sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
We put your time, we turned the clock back. Put you back on the clock.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I guess my concern is that, have we had any other major significant property purchases in the city or acquisitions in the last few years that we have not gotten an appraisal?
No, we have not. And actually, we have two acquisitions that will be coming forth before council, hopefully in the next session, which I believe our next public property hearing, which I believe is at the end of April, which, yes, appraisals have been, the norm is to get to appraisals highest and best use, at least on each property that we either acquire or convey.
And what's the dollar value roughly of those two other properties?
I believe one is $3.5 million and the other is 1.8.
So we're getting appraisals for 1.8 and 3.5, but when we buy something for 40 million and invest 240 million or 230 million, we don't get an appraisal?
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to speak for public property, but I think the distinction is in those cases that the city's buying the properties. In this case, in the police administration building, the city is not buying the property until the end of the lease term. And I don't know if you normally get appraisals when you are entering into a lease.
We do not when we are entering into a lease, no.
Except that isn't part of the transaction is that in the 9th year, we'll be able to buy the property. And we want to know what the value is now because we're putting all this money into it. I mean, I understand your answer to the question, but from I know a little about real estate, okay? And from understanding real estate, if this was our own money, which it is, we should have gotten an appraisal now, A, to help us in negotiation, and B, to know what we're going to be buying even in the 9th year. I mean, we're investing a tremendous amount of money. And my other question is, do we know what we have to pay now in the 9th year, or is that going to be a negotiation?
I don't believe that's a negotiation, but we would have to defer to finance on that question.
So we didn't lock in the price for the 9th year?
I think we just pay off the debt.
No. I don't.
Rashida Johnson, City Treasurer. Yes, we know what we'll have to pay in the 9th year. Again, it's subject to market conditions for tax-exempt bonds at the time, but we do know what the outstanding balance that we will have to pay.
So if we know we're going to pay in the 9th year, why don't we have gotten an appraisal now? I'm just asking the question.
I mean, the way that the documents are structured, that there will be an appraisal, and all the updates that are being done to the building won't be able to be counted for that appraisal when we go to market at that time in the 9th years for purchase.
And I know you're aware of this, and I'm aware of this, that we originally negotiated for a provision of the seller to provide 3.75% fixed 19-year financing, and the city decided to go with 4.03 adjustable in the 9th year. And here's my point. Whether the 3.75 was available or not, we can debate that all day long. Forget that debate for a moment. If we know we're going to keep this building, There is no one sitting in this audience who today would pick an adjustable rate that comes up in 8 years versus locking in a fixed rate, even if it was 4.5%. Knowing what you know about interest rates, we needed to think long-term instead of short-term. We thought short-term, and in the 9th year, many of us won't be here, the city's going to pay the price when rates are 6 or 7%.
Well, one, we did not lock in an adjustable rate in the 9th year.
No, we have to go into the market in the 9th year.
We
and
do.
what are the rates going to be then? Not going to be where they are today. We're at an all-time 60-year low today.
That's
And
correct.
do you, on your own homes, do we take adjustable rates or do you have a fixed rate or adjustable in your own home?
I have a fixed rate, sir, and Councilman, again, it's not a adjustable rate. The way that the documents are written, if we do nothing, then it turns into an adjustable rate in negotiation with the current owner, but we don't plan to do anything. We plan to actually purchase the building and go into market and...
But that's my point. We're going to have to go into the market 9 years from now when interest rates are dramatically higher versus, you can ask anyone in real estate, given the choice, today you're locking in long-term rates. No one is taking the risk going out 9 years. That's just kicking the can down the road. We should have locked in the rate today, and you know my opinion on that. We should have, and individually, everyone in this audience, I guarantee you, will lock into a fixed rate versus going to adjustable. This year, we're going to have 3 more rate increases. Why would we allow the city to do that?
Say that, I'm sorry?
We know for sure there's going to be rate increases. We know in 9 years, rates are not going to be where they are today. Why would we not, as a city, lock into a long-term rate fixed to protect the city?
At the time when we went out in the market for the process, because we did a process to get the rate for the first 9 years, there was, and we had options of, different scenarios. There was no one interested in that time in anything longer than 9 years because of the way that it was structured with the historical tax credits.
But it said in the document, the letter that was presented to council, seller to provide 3.75 fixed for 19 years, or at the discretion of the finance director, different financing. Is that what was said in the document?
That's correct. And at the time when we went through the process, and we've had these conversations, but when we went through the process, we went out to the market with all the options inclusive of what was in the letter. And we, at the time, got the best rate for the city based on current market conditions.
But the letter did say seller to provide, okay? And I think the seller did provide it to us. I'm not faulting the seller, but we didn't take it at that time because we had to pay a fee or something. But
They
even if we
wanted to do a hedge, which
Right,
we were not
right.
authorized to do, which would have cost more money
Okay.
if we would have done nothing. So that's why we could not enter into what the seller was providing at that time.
But the
That's
letter
correct.
didn't say we had to do a hedge. It just said seller to provide, okay?
Mhm.
Number one. Number two, it's just general thinking. If we were agreeable to doing 19-year fixed rate financing then, and all of you agreed to it at that point, okay, why did we switch to a rate that comes up in 9 years?
Again, when we went out into the market, we can't provide financing to ourselves, but when we went out to the market through our process of an RFP to the the universe of banks that we use, no one was interested in what that structure was of the 19 years.
Well, that's not what I had heard. I had heard that because of the amortization of 19 years, the payments would have been $3 million higher.
Well, that's true. One, there was no, and then also the way that the ordinance was written, there would not have been able to.
You had to come back to council for approval, which this body would have given you approval, locking in a long-term rate versus taking risk 9 years from now. My point in this is that we need, as a city, to think long-term. We can't think short-term. We had an opportunity to lock long-term rates. We should have taken advantage of it. I'm not going to belabor the point. Thank you today. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Johnson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we have Michael DeBardinas, City Managing Director, please come back up? And Catherine, Commissioner of Parks and Rec, is she here? Okay, thank you, opponent. I just want some clarification. on the capital improvements for Schuylkill River Trail. And Mike, I know me and you discussed this offline, but I just wanted to clarify for the record. I know we do have significant funding coming from the state, but I'm also looking at the reduction in about $1.1 million over the next 5 years in the Schuylkill River Trail budget. So just want an explanation to it. I know separate from completing the trail, I've had a meeting with University of Pennsylvania as well as Commissioner Catherine at level regarding the improvement of lighting, the improvement of call boxes as relates to public safety along the Schuylkill River Trail. That's a little bit separate from the completion of it.
Right.
And so when I look at the reduction of the capital funding separate from the state, just want to see, does they balance each other out? And also, will these improvements be able to be a part of the new funding that's coming down the pipeline from the state?
Well, I'll take a general swipe at this and then let Aparna get into the particulars. I think what might seem like a reduction is, in last year's budget, we worked with you and with the trail to support the completion of the second boardwalk, which is right now a $36 million project. We recently received a Tiger grant of $12 million. We have a state grant of $10 million. We have local foundations investing as well, and the DCNR as well at the state level. And we're very close to the 30. I think it's safe to say that we'll make the $36 million goal to start the second boardwalk and complete the trail from the Art Museum to Bartram's and connect those neighborhoods and the communities. The annualized budget, and I'll let Aparna take it from here, the annualized budget is for the general maintenance and care of the trail on an annual basis. I'm not sure what that annual allocation is, but and what exactly the request was from the Schuylkill River Trail, but I think Aparna could answer that.
That falls under commerce, the annual request. I'm sorry.
A little more in the microphone.
I believe that annual request falls under commerce's budget line. However, I can speak to the security and lighting improvements.
Who's able to speak to the reduction, though? There's a reduction in roughly $1.1 million. Just for clarification, this is on page 30.
Page 30, yeah.
Item number 13, Schuylkill River Waterfront.
That's right. So I don't, what we've funded in here, and Palin can correct me if I'm going wrong, is what we funded is a request other than their request other than an acquisition request that they had. We didn't refund that request because we didn't have enough details on that request. But otherwise, I believe that we funded the rest of their request.
Okay. And I just want to get clarity, Aparna, in terms of the public safety component.
So subsequent to your meeting with the commissioner and University of Pennsylvania, we did convene a meeting with SRDC, Representative Joe Cernick, again, University of Pennsylvania. We had Streets Department present in our office. And as you know, we've completed the first section of 18 cameras.
Yes.
And going forward, we are in the process of setting up a plan, evaluating where we can get a power supply for the next phase of cameras, and going forward for future projects as well. We're identifying points that are critical to cover and monitor. So as a collective effort between all those agencies, we've actually initiated a process to do that.
Would there be additional funding requested for that next phase? And can that be covered by the additional funding we're about to receive from the state?
So for the Christian to Crescent project, we would anticipate that be covered under that project, under that capital project. For the sections of the trail that are already complete, we will have to do a pricing exercise, and we have to work with SRDC to determine funding sources for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Sanchez, please.
Thank you. If Bridget can come back up, I want to ask some public property investments from Public Property Commissioner Bridget Greenwald. The commissioner and I have been on facilities committees going back 10 years, right? Oh my God. First of all, I want to congratulate you. I know you've been doing extensive work in our firehouses and our police offices, and I know they're highly welcome. You have an updated facilities plan for the city. Could that be shared by council district with everyone?
Yes, actually, we're putting the final touches on it and making sure everything works online, and we're going to reach out to everyone's staff, have them come in and look at the plan. You'll see where your facilities in your district came, what order, priority order they came in. It's a very well put together plan. I owe Alan Urick and Joe Garbarino of our staff and all the public property employees that worked on it a tremendous
So what's the timeline
kudos,
for that?
because it's a great plan. When you say it, you'll be very excited.
I know, we've been talking about this for 10 years.
Yeah, so we finally have it.
So what's the timeline for that? Is that before you
So,
come?
I think it's Hill International was the contractor we used on the plan. So they will be back in at the end of this month. So I would say sometime by mid-April, we'll have the final draft and we should be good to go.
Okay. What is the update on the 2nd and 15th Police District relocations?
So we are in negotiations to relocate the 2nd. Right now, we're in our due diligence period. We've been working with Councilman O'Neill's office on that one. We've been working with Councilman Heenan's office on the 15th, completely renovating the whole existing facility. So as you're probably aware, most of the issues come in because it's just overcrowded. They're really on top of each other. So separating the two will help tremendously.
Okay, so we finally have a site for the 2nd?
We believe we do. We're in the due diligence period, so I don't want to jinx it, as you know how hard it's been.
because it's fallen through a couple times, so I just
Yeah.
want to make sure. And then lastly, I'm proud Councilman Clark has his 22nd Police District. As it relates to the 26th Police District, as you know, it's in a major gentrifying area, and it's in need of major improvements. Has that been considered for the relocation?
It's actually been, we have regular planning and development meetings where it's the PRA, public property, planning and development, and there's somebody else that I'm forgetting, that actually, who is it? PIDC, thank you. PIDC, where that one is on our list. So it's one of those projects that's out there, but we haven't really done a lot on, I will tell you that right now, but it's on the list to be considered to either be, if it's relocated or if it's renovated or what it is, but we know it's in a prime location.
Okay. No, it's just, and it's crowded, right? They don't have parking.
Yeah.
Now the houses are butted. It's just kind of, okay. Yeah, if you could just keep us in the loop
Absolutely.
as it relates to that, because there's an area of concern. And I'll wait for the plan, and then we'll talk during your budget hearing.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Green?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have some questions for our city treasurer, to follow up on the question I asked earlier. Yeah, the first question I asked was in reference to the concerns we had regarding our recent debt credit rating downgrade. From my understanding in conversation with Anna earlier, she didn't feel that would have an impact on our cost of borrowing going forward. But in the testimony, Ms. Sharp talked about the concern regarding our ratio of debt service to total expenses. And I wanted to know what was our debt ratio, what is our current ratio of debt service to total expenses, and how does that compare to the city in past years as well as other cities?
I don't currently have our updated ratios. We are working on those, so I can get you that information.
Okay. And then also, included with that information you can provide, how will the additional planned borrowings possibly impact that? Because we have Rebuild on the horizon as well as both the housing initiative and energy conservation, and how will those additional borrowings also possibly impact that ratio? So if you could provide that as well.
Yep, we have a model that we feed all that into, and we're in the process of doing it now, so we'll make sure you get that information.
Okay. Also, earlier, I was asking some questions in reference to diversity in reference to our offerings. I know one of the things that I've noticed in both the information provided from FY16 and 17 that we've done a better job than in years past in having diverse bond counsel, disclosure counsel, underwriter counsel, as well as FAs for our underwriting initiatives. But a question in reference to book runners or senior managers on our investment offerings. I noticed we've had minority investment banks, both co-seniors and co-managers, but only one minority investment firm was actually a book runner based on 16 and 17. And I was curious about your thoughts going forward in FY19.
Well, the information that we did provide you, we had a MBWBE firm serve as co-book runner on a large airport transaction that was just done in December, and we're actually pricing a deal next week for the Art Museum Energy Efficiency Project, as well as a refunding, and MBWBE is actually the book runner on that transaction.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Moving forward with some other departments. Wanted to talk with the Water Department.
Oh, this one.
Water.
Good afternoon, Councilman. Deborah McCarty, Water Commissioner.
All right. Good afternoon. On page 191, and looking at the budget detail for the capital program and the capital budget, it makes reference to the meter replacement system. I see in FY19 about $30 million in new money and about $80 million over the course of the 6-year capital program. What's our current status with the meter replacement?
So we are in the very, very final stages of contract negotiation, and we hope to come to City Council in the next few weeks with the ordinances that we can proceed with the contract.
Okay. Also, I have a question in reference to SEPTA. I'm not sure who from the administration could answer that. Okay. Good.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
Okay, on page 179 of the capital program, looks like, actually, let me correct that.
Sir, identify yourself for the record, just.
Sorry. Tom McFadden, I'm SEPTA CFO.
Okay. Let me correct that. Page, let's see that. Yeah, actually, I was correct. Page, actually, 185 of the detail for the capital program and capital budget. Looks like we'll be spending approximately $226 million, up to about $1.4 billion over the course of the capital program. And I want to get some perspective. My understanding, this is dollars that the city spends that helps, that we leverage with SEPTA in reference to their federal and state dollars that they receive?
Yes, sir. The $4.97 million in total that SEPTA has requested from the city will actually leverage about $215 million in state and federal funds.
Okay. And then considering, now, now I know SEPTA is a regional authority. Do other counties also provide similar types of dollars to SEPTA?
They do.
Okay.
We need local funding for all federal and state.
Okay. Is it in the same level or amount that we're talking about, $226 million in funds in FY19, up to about $1 billion over the course of the 6-year capital program? Are other jurisdictions within SEPTA providing the same level of funding?
The city, for local match, the city provides the highest percentage.
Okay. Considering the city provides the highest match, from my understanding, SEPTA being a state authority, we have only 2 representatives on the board?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Has there been past experiences where we've tried to, considering we've put such a significant amount of dollars in from a local match, use that to leverage perspectives in reference to how SEPTA allocates dollars from an operations perspective?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
Considering we have provided such a large amount from a local matching perspective, what has been our strategy in reference to talking with SEPTA and how they allocate dollars, both from a capital project perspective and also from operating projects going forward, considering the amount of money that we provide to them?
Well,
do we ask them to prioritize projects? We ask them to look at areas in the city of Philadelphia first? We have a lot of infrastructure issues in the city. So how are we leveraging the significant amount of dollars that we're providing to SEPTA, even though we only have a two-person representation on a much larger board? How are we leveraging those dollars?
So I'll take that one on. So yeah, there's no fixed strategy in terms of how we're approaching SEPTA, but we are always advocating for the projects within the city. And so as we're looking at capital investments, the work that you see kind of around where we're sitting right now and the work that's going on in the concourse, that's the result of the city advocating very strongly for SEPTA to prioritize state of good repair projects within the city. Similar projects are coming forward, so we will talk soon with you guys about the trolley network. There's vehicles that we have out which are mostly within the city, not exclusively within the city, but mostly within the city, which need to be replaced moving forward 5 and 10 years. And so that's a major investment that's going to benefit the city disproportionately. So that's something we want to make sure is a high priority for SEPTA. Similarly, the overwhelming majority of bus riders are within the city, and most of the bus traffic is within the city as well. And so we want to make sure that the service planning, the scheduling, the routing of those buses is a high priority for SEPTA. And so I'm happy to say that we have, over the past year, done a lot of work to coordinate with them to sort of lay the groundwork for making some improvements in terms of the bus operations as well.
And are these dollars only used on city-specific projects?
City dollars are, that's
right. However, some of these projects still used from a macro perspective, because I noticed that some of the projects are spent on regional rail substation improvements, regional rail signal system modernization, and other types of investments that are used by people from outside the city. Correct.
The substations that are in this plan are for substations that are in the city.
But benefit the region as a whole.
They do. Because,
Has there been any situation in the past where we as a city, through the administration, have said to our representatives on the SEPTA board, there are certain initiatives that you should support based on the fact of the dollars that we provide?
Well, that's a constant conversation that we're having with SEPTA, that's right.
When you say constant conversation, can you give some examples of any specific issues?
So the ones that I mentioned, I think, are worth pointing out. We've had good success in terms of working with SEPTA to establish agreements about what we've called the lease-back arrangement in terms of who has control over facilities, mostly in the concourse, but in general, who maintains facilities. That's all been a result of us advocating for the city's interests on the basis of the money that we are putting into the system.
Okay. What about larger initiatives? Like, for example, I know there's been some discussion about extending the Broad Street line to Navy Yard, but I also know SEPTA's been interested in some of the regional projects like King of Prussia. Where does that go in reference to negotiation regarding the city having a larger role?
It's not an either or. I think both of those projects are good projects, and it makes sense for all of the people in the region to kind of advocate for both of the projects to take place. The Broad Street line clearly is all within the city, so we could see a real benefit for people to get to the Navy Yard, especially as we're looking for opportunities to kind of market the city. This came up in conversations with Amazon, and I think if Amazon does figure that this is the best city to come for, that's going to put a lot of steam behind that type of project. It's a little bit longer term though, so we've just kind of worked out the preliminary work for getting that done. The King of Prussia project is further along, and the benefit from the perspective of the city is that we have a workforce which does have opportunities that they can then access, which are outside of the city. Now, of course, from the city's perspective, we want to make sure there's as many opportunities as possible for people to work, take care of their other needs within the city. But as long as people do feel like they need to get around without a car, we're always happy to have more access all over the region.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the perspective of workforce and also commuting, because obviously it seems like there's some benefit for the city if the King of Prussia line gets developed. But there's also other types of transportation initiatives that are helpful to city residents. I know Councilman Greenlee and I have also been talking with the administration as well as SEPTA about reverse commuting. Now, I know that's not part of the capital plan, but what's the administration's perspective in saying to SEPTA, listen, we're working with you on other initiatives, but we need some funding for reverse commuting that can come out of your operating budget, especially when organizations like the Philadelphia Unemployment Project have gone back through their numbers and been able to take the cost from about $750,000 to now about $250,000. When you look at the total cost of the dollars allocated to SEPTA, is a drop in a bucket, but that can help a number of people in the city of Philadelphia, considering that poverty is our #1 issue, and we have a 25.7% poverty rate, and there are jobs in the suburbs that people need to get access to, and we have an organization that's been working on this for some time, and they just need $250,000 to get there. So where's the administration's perspective on that?
So just to kind of add a little bit more background before I get into the answer. So SEPTA is operated as a pass-through for state money in that respect, and that savings that you've talked about is sort of like a separate pot of state money that can be available for that purpose, and we're encouraged that the state is stepping up to the plate and providing those resources. I think, on the subject of kind of everyone kind of putting in their fair share, that's where we're at from the city's perspective. We think that on the one hand, we are very encouraged that there's opportunities for folks who reside in Philadelphia to go outside of Philadelphia to find work, but we feel like that's also a benefit for those other jurisdictions. So those counties, those townships, those boroughs, which are around the region, are actually getting access to a good workforce. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiring these people to come out of Philadelphia and take these jobs. And so we think we have to talk with them, and I think SEPTA and the SEPTA board provides us with the appropriate forum for these types of conversations about kind of matching the contribution the administration would put forward to help with these reverse commuting initiatives. And on that basis, we can all put, some of our resources in and get a bigger pot to work with to kind of close the gap.
And I'm glad you said that the board is the appropriate forum for advocating these issues. I would think, and I'll be following up with the administration in reference to the administration advocating to our representatives on the SEPTA board why SEPTA should be providing resources to organizations like the Philadelphia Unemployment Project, which provides reverse commuting, because if we're going to address this poverty issue, we need to use every arrow in our quiver, and this is one way to address it. I've been working with SEPTA over the past year to try to identify dollars, and we'll see what happens during this budget process in order to get, which now is a much smaller amount of money, as a way to help people get jobs and access to jobs, which ultimately will impact the economy of our city.
Okay.
All right. Last question. I'm not
Councilman, I think you're well over the time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear the bell. I didn't see any lights. Oh,
Yeah, it was a long time ago. You probably forgot. That's
he
all.
just hit his light.
What's that?
I'll defer to my colleague.
Okay.
He just hit his light a second ago, but I have one more.
Oh, okay. Actually, I was going to sneak a couple questions that the council president wanted too. So, by the way, Councilman Green, I'm glad you mentioned reverse commuting. It does seem like a relatively small amount of money for what could benefit a lot of people. So, just throw that in there. Thank you both. The two questions Council President had. One, City Hall security. Who's the best one to answer that? Is that Rebecca? And actually, Anna, while she's walking up, maybe I'll sneak in the other one, okay? Keep things moving here. We see in the capital program there's $3.6 million for staffing to support the capital program, which I understand is OIT. Is that correct?
So, which one? Sorry, what are you referring to?
We're on page 88.
Page 88, did you say?
Yes.
Yes, this is OIT, yes.
That's OIT. Is that for staffing? Is that normal to have it in the capital?
Yes, and actually what we're trying to do, which is why it doesn't show in future years, is that those people will be moved to the operating budget. We're trying to move...
They what? I'm sorry. Get a little closer. Yeah.
Sorry. They will be moved to the operating budget. So our plan is that, yes, this has historically been the case, that there have been personnel funded on the capital budget, particularly for OIT, and it's completely appropriate related to the projects. However, we'd like to move away from that practice and actually fund them on the operating budget. And so you see that in the operating budget. These people who were previously paid out of the capital budget will be moved to the operating budget in OIT. Okay. These are people to support the implementation of large capital projects. Mm-hmm. And so it's completely within the rules and of the bond ordinances to be able to use them for the projects. However, from a financial practice, we'd prefer to not pay debt service for personnel, and so we'd like to move them to the operating budget. And so you'll see that it's expensive to do it all in one go, so we're doing it gradually, so you'll see it in multiple departments. So Parks and Recreation staff were moved this year in the FY19 budget and now being paid for out of the operating budget. OIT and public property in the same way will all be eventually moved over to the operating budget.
Okay. Good. And I think that came up in the water
That's
department
right. Also
before.
the same thing with water. It's also going to take them a few years to do this. This is not something we can do overnight because we'll now have to find the operating budget to be able to support that. But it's something we'll do gradually, especially with water. There's a large number of personnel in water. It'll take a few years to move them over, but eventually everybody will be moved over to the operating budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Bridget, on City Hall security, where are we, timeline, that kind of thing?
So Bridget Collins Greenwald, Public Property Commissioner. So we've been working, as you know, Councilman Greenlee, with your office, the Council President's office. We have the full support of his office, Mayor Kenny, on securing City Hall. So we actually have an ask in, but it's not in the capital budget, it's in the operating budget. So if that goes through as we would like it to do, we have the plans all ready to go. We had the Philadelphia Police Department's Homeland Security and then National Homeland Security come through City Hall. They gave us full reports with recommendations on what to do. So we're going to phase in the security. So we believe the way it looks right now, and I think we had everyone's agreement, the northeast and the northwest side will be the entrances, and then you'll get more detailed information, but the money lies in the operating budget.
It's in the operating, okay.
Yes.
And that's one of my questions, was there going to be another entrance? So the northwest you're also looking at?
Northwest makes the most sense right now, and that made the most sense from the standpoint of the experts in Homeland Security.
Okay. All right, and you'll be obviously giving us more information.
Yes, and we go through Councilman Jones's Public Safety Committee as well, so there's a great representation of council on that we've been sharing information with.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for that. Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Can I hang out for a minute, Commissioner?
I tried. No.
I know you did. I'd like to just get an answer to this one question. Was there an appraisal for 46th and Market when that was purchased?
So the purchase of 46th and Market was, PIDC purchased 4601 Market for the city years and years ago in a previous administration, I believe. And the purchase of 4601 Market from the city, by the city to PIDC, covered the carrying cost that PIDC had put into the property. So it evened out to be about $4 million. And when an appraisal was done for 4601 Market, it almost evened out to that amount.
So there was an appraisal ordered for that asset?
There was an appraisal for 4601, and then the purchase was based on the carrying costs that PIDC carried by purchasing it for the city.
And that was about $4 million where an appraisal was done?
Yes, I believe it was I'm saying that off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it was about $4 million. I can get you that exact amount, but I believe it was $4 million.
But just to be clear, on 400 North Broad, where the acquisition was 400 and the infrastructure was about 220, 230 million, no appraisal was done?
No appraisal was done on 400 North
Thank
Broad.
you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Fleet and OIT. Actually, I have a question for you.
Okay.
In the capital budget, the administration is asking for 58 million for, I don't know, maybe this is Bridget, 58 million for public property.
That's right.
Can we get some idea on how that money is going to be spent? Or invested, I should say.
Yes, are you looking at any particular line item of that from the budget?
Just in general, an overview of the 58 million.
Yeah, we can give you that. I mean, it shows, you can see in the detail.
City Hall, MSB.
So if you look on page 151, it shows the breakdown of some of these. So you can see triplex improvements, you can see the City Hall exterior renovations, you can see how we propose to break down that by what we call kind of the project level. We can get you more details on each of these if that's helpful, but you can see triplex, city improvements, the elevators at CJC, City Hall exterior, City Hall improvements in general, conservation of art. Those are the breakdowns of the kind of the project level that we show. But we can get you more detail if you'd like to see that.
So how much are we spending on City Hall for improvements? Is it 20 million? Is that the number?
On which?
Number 5 on your page 151.
On 5, yeah, so you can see these are different sources. So the FB, I think, refers to federal.
So what does the CN designation mean? It says for the cumulative time period,
So-
20,500,000.
We can, if we also have all the codes, just so you're aware, the codes are shown. Just want to make sure you can see, so you can see where the codes are. CN means the new loans, so that's our kind of general operating investment. CT means the carry forward, that's the prior year money. FB means federal, so you can see those.
So
and
is this
then
accurate that
PB
20 million is going to be spent over the next 6 years in the City Hall?
This is our proposed infrastructure improvements at City Hall, yes. And it shows starting in FY20.
And are these infrastructure improvements somewhere where we hired an outside engineer to determine what we had to do, or are these just cosmetic improvements?
And Bridget can talk in more detail about that. She has the specific projects.
She's getting her exercise today, I can say.
That's right.
Good afternoon again. So we have, yes, we actually have a master plan for City Hall. We have an exterior plan, we have an interior one. We did put that out to an architect firm probably about 1.5 2 years ago. So we have a final report. We have one on the portals. We have one for what we would do with the courtyard. We have one for interior.
So without getting into a lot of detail, there's 58 million being spent. The two biggest areas are triplex facilities, number 3 on page 151, and 20 million for City Hall. Give me the quick overview of those two investments.
Sure.
What are we getting for that money?
So for the triplex, you're getting elevators. So there'll be brand new, there'll be an elevator modernization project in the CJC, in the MSB and the One Parkway building. MSB and One Parkway should be done by, I would say, summer 2020, and then the CJC follows closely behind in 2021. They're elevator projects, so that takes up a great bulk of the money. As for City Hall, there are various projects that we're doing in City Hall. We are actually going for some grant money. Some of that is grant money too, like if you see there's a code that has a P in front of it, I believe, PB, that's actually money, private money that we are hoping to get. So we have grant applications into some preservation societies and things of that nature to try to actually work on the portals and things of that nature. We have a project for the tower that we just completed. You probably saw that we had City Hall, William Penn up in scaffolding for a while. We have stuff with a project for the elevator up there. We have a project in some of the rooms in City Hall that require an extensive amount of work to actually get them in fair condition. So that's spread out through all of City Hall and all of the triplex, that money.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think my time's up.
Wait, you know what, since the gentlemen are up there, are your
No.
questions long, or you
No.
want to, Councilman Green, you have one, all right, why don't we finish, who do you need up the table?
Not sure.
Okay, gentlemen, stay there for a second, so we're not running back and forth. Go ahead, Councilman Green.
We'll have Anna come up, and then she can defer to whoever needs to come. Currently, PGW is working on a P3 initiative with our liquefied natural gas facility. Question is there any other P3 opportunities that the city may have? I know that other cities have been very creative in trying to find ways to use capital dollars or get additional capital dollars in a more creative way. From Los Angeles County in reference to their rental car systems to other jurisdictions, and considering how old and the limited dollars that we have from a capital perspective, have there been any discussion or thoughts of assets that the city has or other type of entities that we could possibly look at from a P3 perspective?
I think we need to probably do some more research on where those opportunities are. I think most of where we've been looking at ways of preserving our resources is just sort of what Bridget was talking about with, is there a way that we can partner with, if we find outside funding from grants funding? We haven't necessarily examined in great detail about P3s. We probably need to do a bit more work to see if there are any opportunities there.
Yeah, one of the questions I had for the Managing Director's Office is identifying, and I think they actually refer this information to public property, about identifying city assets, especially those that needed major capital investments or improvements, to possibly see if they would be flexible for P3 opportunities.
Yeah, we are actively investigating some P3 opportunities. I should start by saying we use the word P3 a lot, but there's, dozens of things that could fall under the category of P3s. The Water Department has some good experience with a couple different types of P3s. They have a facility which is essentially converting, waste material into fertilizer. That's been a successful model. It's not clear how much that can be scaled up or replicated, but for what it's worth, it is something that we're pretty happy with. Water Department's also looking at opportunities to work with private entities to do green infrastructure. So sometimes this involves working with particular properties when improvements are taking place, but also we're looking at opportunities to kind of scale that work up as well. There's a few opportunities that may come forward in terms of working with sanitation and similarly converting refuse waste material into usable products. And these all need to be vetted pretty thoroughly before we move forward, but we are examining where there is value for the city.
Right. Yeah, the reason I raised the question, because it's something I think that from the capital program perspective we should be looking at, because of my work with National League of Cities. I've often tried to bring back ideas that I gather from other colleagues who are council members or commissioners or aldermen in other cities. And, for example, the District of Columbia, although it is a federal district and still different than City of Philadelphia, they have an office. They actually have a P3 office in reference to initiatives that they're working on, and other cities are looking at these in a more aggressive way. I just don't want us to be behind the 8 ball on some of these initiatives and opportunities like we have been in the past on other initiatives like with ESCOs, which we took a very long time period before we even did the ESCO for the quadplex, when Governor Rendell was using ESCOs at Department of General Services, and the market somewhat changed from the time he was doing it to the time we finally did ESCO for the quadplex. So I guess my perspective is I'll be having hearings on P3s and bring in some of the contacts I've met over the past year and a half to either testify in person or on the phone to kind of give us some different ideas what other cities have done regarding P3s, because it's still a very new initiative, especially for the United States. But I know some of the people we've been working with, like, for example, Johnson Controls at the Art Museum, they're doing P3 work in Canada and other parts of the country. So I think it's in its infancy, we should try to get best practices and use this as a way to leverage additional dollars to really upgrade and make investments in our assets where we don't have the resources from a macro perspective to invest in some of these assets in a one-shot perspective or a short shot, as opposed to piecemealing capital dollars over a long period of time.
Understood.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Turnberger has his light on, but the gentleman who's sitting here, I feel, wait, who do you need?
I would like Commissioner Greenwald.
Commissioner Greenwald.
I didn't go far.
Oh, there, she didn't go far this time.
She's right back of me.
Oh, okay. All right.
Commissioner, thank you for your testimony and being here all through the day and getting all the exercise back and forth, being here for the call of various council members. You had marked in the, that we just chatted about some private dollars are being raised, particularly I think for City Hall. If you do not get those private dollars, those private grants, what happens?
I assume Anna gives me the difference. No, I think what we would do is we would leverage some of the existing projects we have and maybe do additional work, but it would just be at a much slower pace because we wouldn't have the funding exactly, you know what I mean, in one lump sum. So I think instead of, like, say, completing like a portal project in a year, it would be spread out. So I just think the timeline would increase.
Would increase. And do you think you've been rather successful in getting grants for these particular, they're almost, I would say, historic projects. You're doing,
Yeah, so last year we were able to get a Heart of the Community grant from Southwest Airlines, which we were successful with that. And this year we just put in, with the help of the grants office, a request for the National Preservation Society. So we haven't heard back yet, but because we had this plan ready to go for City Hall, we were able to provide, like, shovel-ready, as they say, projects, which the grant folks seem to be interested in. So I'm very optimistic about that one.
Excellent. Okay. Commissioner, thank you very much. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Keona Sanchez.
Thank you. This is more for Anna, and I guess just some clarity. As we talk about our capital projects, are we paying all of the L&I fees and everything as it relates to some of these projects when we do it in-house versus when we parcel it out?
I actually don't know the answer to whether we pay internally for projects for L&I fees. Do we pay? Sorry.
It does depend on how we're doing the project. If we do it in-house, we haven't, it differs because it's city fund's a city fund. But if we're using an outside contractor, then they actually do we all pull permits, but they pay the fee. So in general, yes, we are paying for L&I services.
Not that I want to short L&I. I'm just thinking in terms of best practices, and as we roll out Rebuild and some others, are we considering figuring out a way where we can capture the value of the work without putting the cost burden on ourselves?
I can't speak for Rebuild, but I would assume that they're doing all the best practice investigations right now, and that they would. Like I said, when we do the work, we pull the permits and we don't pay L&I. We have a system set up, It's already in place, and it's actually was established by executive order, I think under Mayor Rendell when he was mayor, because as you said, like why take money from one spot to pay?
We do it in others. I guess, Anna, can you respond whether we're doing that in our internal or Parma? Yep. Well, no, when we're doing our internal capital stuff, when we're pooling permits.
That's why I defer to Bridget on that. You say with? I'm sorry.
No, that's for public property. I'm saying for the other capital.
Oh, for the other departmental work?
Yes.
So I can ask Mike, do we do this for streets? I'm not sure. This is not my expertise, I'm sorry.
Just a general answer, the publicly directed work, unless there's a contractor who put in a bid, those fees are not charged to the department. We're able to issue permits for water department work, within streets or other streets department work without having some, financial transaction recorded. But if a private contractor is bidding on that work, they need to go through the process somewhat similarly as if they're coming to do private work or they're working on a public project. That's the general rule.
Okay. While I have you on there real quick, are we monitoring the soft costs related to all our projects, like in your portfolio? Are we looking at those costs?
So these are the costs incurred by the department in order to support some kind of work, whatever form it is.
Design,
Yeah.
all of those things? I mean, do we have an average? Do we have aspirational goals around some of this stuff?
We are kind of organizing ourselves to understand that better. And there's more work to do, but right now I can't give you any dollar figure that's associated with any specific project unless it's tied to a grant where there's a reimbursement involved. So if we're taking state money or we're taking federal money to do the work, they expect us to keep a record of the hours and the other expenses that the city incurs. So that's way when we provide them with an invoice, they know what they're paying for. So those projects are tracked in that manner. But in general, for city work, which is just kind of routine city work or city work that's completely locally funded, the overhead, the administrative cost of doing that tracking often exceeds the value that we have. So it's a challenge, but we understand that there is a benefit. So we want to make sure that we're adopting the systems that allow us to do that as much as possible.
How long do you think it would, I mean, given technology, shouldn't we be better capturing that number?
This is a project which involves, I think, having OIT here, getting better systems. A lot of the work that we do internally is still relying on paper. And when we get away from paper and we're able to use the electronic systems more fully, and that's, something on a 1224.
But you don't have a standard as you're approving projects in your portfolio of if someone's, hate to use that term because you're an engineer, over-engineering? We're starting from net zero and we're spending 30-40% on soft costs on
I
these
wouldn't
projects?
say generally we're spending that much. I mean, typically.
How would we know? We don't have no way of tracking.
Well, because we don't have capacity to spend 30-40% on soft costs. Typically, what we're finding is it's in the 10% range. If you took hour per hour, we have to.
Is that including our internal? Because one thing is.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking
about. And then when we sub it out, when we're subbing out these projects, do you have a standard of what soft costs should be related to?
Yeah, so where we're at now is it's more subjective. It's a level of effort that we manage by meeting and having internal discussions around specific projects. And when a specific project starts to exceed the resources, the capacity of a given unit to work on it, then they'll raise the red flag and they'll say, wait, we can't.
So we don't have standards across the board?
There's not a set standard and there's not a system, and that's something that we should set as a goal, but that's probably something which on a 5-year time frame we can take on.
We can't do something quicker than that?
Well, we need the
we're
software.
We're spending a lot of capital money,
We
and I
need the
mean, not having standards about what triggers
So
a review.
there are subjective standards. That's the best answer I can give you. They're subjective standards. They're not quantified. We are 24, 36 months out from having the technology that we need in order to start thinking
So
really
right now,
about.
do you look at that and monitor that at all?
Yes, we do. And that work was incorporated in the budget requests that we made in order to get the staff in-house in the streets department, for example, to provide more data on a real-time basis and to do more quantifiable, prioritization.
So the project managers don't have the capacity to do that now? I mean, they're approving it.
They do. So, like I'm saying, they know how many hours they have in a week, and they know how many hours their staff people have in a week. And so on a weekly basis, they have to figure out who is doing what. And they're listening to their supervisors and their supervisors all the way up to me, the managing director and the mayor, to tell them what the priorities are, generally speaking. And the challenge for them, and I really take my hats off to the people who are doing this on a weekly and monthly basis, is how to juggle all those balls. Because frankly, if we had a quantifiable standard, we'd be well beyond 100%.
Yeah, and I guess when we get to your departments, we'll look a little bit around the timelines and why some of these projects are taking so long. Because that's what I'm trying to get to, the issue of capacity versus cost. Because, on the one hand, we say we don't have spend capacity, and then on the other hand, we don't have capacity to monitor, but then it costs us more money.
Well, we are monitoring, but we monitor subjectively based on what a team can manage in a given amount of time. And we're very fortunate. We bring in a lot of grant dollars, and the Streets Department, Managing Director's Office, has been very successful in bringing in the resources, but all that work needs to get done.
Okay,
And
so that should be reflected in when we look at your backlog, that should be reflected there, right?
Yes, and you should know that we communicated this in the budget request, and we're very grateful that that was heard. And so we're hopeful that in this next year, and then moving forward from this next year, we're going to be a lot more systematic, and we'll be able to answer that question a lot better.
So until you have your data system, there's no way of us in the next year setting up some standards around
We can
this?
talk about that. I think we should probably get a better idea of what kind of standards you're looking for, and we'll do the
I want
best
to
we
get
can.
stuff done on time
Yeah,
and on budget.
we do too.
It's real simple.
We do too, and you should know these dollars we're getting from the state, the dollars we get from the federal government, they have sunsets. They don't want you just taking their money and sitting on projects for forever. So there's always a challenge to get this stuff done before they ask for their money back. So we're fully aware, not just from the perspective of delivering for the citizens of Philadelphia, but also because the funders, there's not just a blank check and
We're funders, the citizens are funders.
Sure,
I feel
certainly.
like we move for the state and the feds, what about for ourselves?
I agree, you're 100%
I mean, we're
right.
stewards of their money too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Council President. 3 quick questions. One is for Fleet. The Fleet Department, have you guys purchased the trash compactors in prior years? I've asked about this question because I was hearing that our trucks were old and tended to break down, which drove our overtime costs. Have we purchased new trucks this year, trash compactors?
Yes, we have. This year we had, my name's Chris Cochi, I'm the fleet manager. Okay. Yes, sir, we have. We've purchased, each year we attempted to purchase 35 to 40 refuse compactors. This year for 19, we intend to purchase 40.
So do we have enough that we won't have overtime?
We hope.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for OIT and then Streets Department. On OIT, we have a program of spending 118 or investing 118 million over the next, I guess, 2019 to 2024. And I see that FAMIS, the financial management system, will be updated over the next few years. How do we ensure this process is implemented on time and not over budget? Because you've had some experiences in the past where we had some bumps in the road.
Mark Wheeler, Interim Chief Information Officer for Office of Innovation and Technology. I think as Catherine Lamb, our deputy, had mentioned earlier before, we will have a vendor that we will work with closely throughout the process, and we think that's a much better way to approach these very large-scale operations, to have someone who's looking at both the technical and the operating side along with us to ensure that there's more time and accountability on both sides, both from our vendor and from the city stakeholders are collaborating on that.
What do you think the time frame is realistically to have the new accounting system in place?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult for us to gauge because we have to go through a full requirements process, and because there are multiple components to this, it's going to be a large requirement gathering period. And then there's the negotiation process with the vendor and what they'll bring to the table on the timeline as well. So it's extremely hard for us to estimate that right now.
Not to pin you down, but is this a year, 2 years, 3 years?
I would think it would be multiple years. It would not just be a year because of the because of the complexity, and we're looking at our entire financial system there and all of the software and all of the connections that are made by those systems to other systems. It would be a multi-year process.
And from your position, I'm a big believer in innovation and technology in government. Are there other investments we should be making to save money?
Are there other investments that we could be making? There's always ways to do continuous improvement, whether we're looking at our public works operations or internally on our procurement operations. Certainly, there can definitely be ways to do that. We have an innovation management unit that does engagements by department to build that type of capacity and decision-making ability within the department so they can actually move forward on the ideas that can best suit and make their operations more efficient and serve the citizens better.
Do you think you could give us a list of those projects that include new innovation and technology that could show us the approximate cost of the project and the payback in terms of time? Like, I'm specifically looking for projects that pay back in 5 to 10 years.
I think we could definitely do that for you, put something together to look at the projects that we could best qualify as innovative and to see what they're doing in terms of improving operations and saving any time and money.
Any investment that will pay us back in 5 to 10 years, we should be looking at and doing today. So
Certainly.
thank you very much. Last question is for streets. And by the way, I want to commend you. Every time I call, you take care of the problem, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. Is there any opportunity to bring back, I was told the weekly citywide street sweeping would cost us $5.2 million, and it would require a one-time cost of $12 million for the purchase of equipment. Is that something the Streets Department plans on making an investment in this new budget?
That is something that we're certainly looking at, not this budget year, but that's something that we're looking at through the Zero Waste and Litter Cabinet. Yesterday, when I testified about the litter index, I think our number one problem is to try to control illegal dumping right now, which is a bigger challenge. We spend nearly $8 to $9 million a year collecting illegal dumping off our streets of Philadelphia. So I think that's the priority for us now, Councilman.
So in conjunction with the illegal dumping, is the streets sweeping something we look at in 12 months from now? Let me tell you why I say that. I look at illegal dumping and I look at cleaning the streets, and I come from the real estate world, as our front lawn. And we have properties that were valued prior to 17. Our real estate value in the city was $134 billion in value. So to invest $5 million a year to clean the streets in front of that real estate, to me, is a good investment, in addition to making sure we get rid of this trash from illegal dumping. I mean, all those things, we should make this city much cleaner than it is.
Understood, yes. That's something
It'll
that
improve
we'll
our value in the long run. It's an investment.
Yes. That's something that we will look into, yes.
So I'd like you to consider instituting that, if you can, the street sweeping as soon as possible, because I think it'll make a big difference in how people perceive the city and how people perceive government.
Yeah, we will certainly take a look at it. We do it on a limited basis now with the number of street sweepers, but the magnitude that you just mentioned, we will certainly have to look into that.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman Taubenberg.
Thank you very much. A question for Commissioner Williams. Commissioner, illegal dumping, you just mentioned that. It's something that comes very strong in my DNA, and that comes from my background being a ground supervisor at Friends Hospital. What can this council do to help you stop illegal dumping?
Well, I think we need to look at, and it's already started with the legislation that was passed, increasing the number of fines that we currently implement. Before, it was a smack on the wrist.
Yeah.
People thought
It was
that
like a dumping fee. You came into Philadelphia, dumped your load,
and then you go, and if you get caught, you only pay sometimes $75. So increasing that up to...
It was like a fee. It was,
It was worth the risk of coming and
Absolutely.
dumping. So those type of laws and legislation help us. It gives us the tools necessary to try to identify and catch them. We need more legislation like that, and so we will certainly be working with this council
I'd
and
love
body.
to work with you and my colleagues in having stricter laws on short dumping, as they call it.
That would be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good, Councilman? Good. There being no more additional questions, let me hurry up. Somebody comes in the room. That concludes our questions for these witnesses. There being none, the committee will stand in recess until Wednesday, March 28th at 10 a.m., which time we will reconvene in room 400. Thank you very much for your testimony.